She thought running to the frontier would save her. She was wrong. When Elena Ward stepped off that stagecoach into Red Hollow, she wasn't looking for love. She was looking for somewhere her past couldn't find her. But in a town where secrets don't stay buried and judgment comes faster than justice, one woman's attempt to disappear becomes a fight to finally be seen. This is a story about the lies we tell to survive, the truth that sets us free, and the kind of love that doesn't ask you to be perfect, just honest. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach hit another rut, and Elena Ward's teeth rattled so hard she tasted copper. She'd been tasting it for 3 days now, blood and dust and the kind of fear that sits in your throat like a stone you can't swallow. Through the gap in the canvas cover, she could see Red Hollow taking shape on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings that looked like they'd been dropped there by accident and forgotten on purpose. The woman sitting across from her, Mrs. Calloway, a widow heading to her sister's place, had stopped trying to make conversation somewhere around the second day. Now she just clutched her carpet bag and stared at Elena with the kind of pity that makes you feel smaller than silence ever could. "First time out west?" Mrs. Calloway finally asked, her voice scraped raw from the dust. Elena nodded. She didn't trust herself to say more than that. "Meeting family?" Something like that. It wasn't exactly a lie. Caleb Rourke had signed his name on a piece of paper that promised her a place to stay, meals, and the protection of his name. In exchange, she'd signed hers, Elena Ward, though that wasn't the name she'd been born with, and it wasn't the name that had been dragged through the mud back in Missouri. That name she'd left behind like a dress that didn't fit anymore. The stagecoach lurched to a stop so suddenly that Elena's carpet bag slid off her lap and hit the floor. Her hands were shaking when she picked it up. Everything she owned was in that bag, and it wasn't much. 2 dresses, 1 practical, and 1 that used to be nice before the road got to it. A photograph of her mother that was so faded you could barely make out her face. A book of poetry she'd read so many times the spine was held together with hope and stubbornness. "Red Hollow!" the driver shouted. "End of the line!" Elena's heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. Mrs. Calloway was already standing, already moving toward the door with the kind of purpose that came from knowing exactly where you were going and who'd be waiting for you. Elena sat frozen for 1 more second, 2, 3. "You coming, dear?" She forced herself to stand, forced herself to move. The sunlight outside was blinding after 3 days in the dim interior of the coach, and the heat hit her like a slap. She stepped down onto the street, and her boot caught on the last step. She stumbled, went down hard on her hands and knees in the dirt, and felt something inside her just break. Not her bones. Something deeper than that. The tears came before she could stop them, hot and furious and completely useless. She stayed there on her hands and knees in the middle of the street, crying like a fool while the dust settled around her and the whole town watched. "You all right, miss?" A man's voice, rough but not unkind. Elena didn't look up. She couldn't. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice came out broken. "You don't look fine." She finally raised her head. The man standing over her was tall and sunburned, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't looking at her like she was pathetic either. He was just looking at her like she was a person who'd fallen down and might need help getting up. "I said I'm fine," she repeated, and this time her voice had some steel in it. He considered her for a moment, then held out his hand anyway. She took it. What else could she do? And he pulled her to her feet like she weighed nothing at all. "Caleb Rourke," he said. Her breath caught. This was him. The man whose letter had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had started to tear. The man who'd written, "I don't need a woman who'll pretend to love me. I need a partner who won't run when things get hard." "Elena Ward," she said, and waited for him to see through the name to the truth underneath. He just nodded. "Your bag?" She'd dropped it when she fell. He picked it up, brushed off the dust, handed it back to her. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who worked hard and didn't complain about it. "My wagon's over there," he said, pointing to a buckboard hitched to 2 tired-looking horses. "Unless you need time to—" "No." She cut him off too quickly, then tried again. "No, I'm ready." She wasn't ready. She'd never be ready. But staying here in the street with people staring wasn't an option. And going back wasn't an option either, so forward was the only direction left. She followed him to the wagon, hyper-aware of the eyes tracking them. A woman in a yellow dress whispered something to the man beside her. Two old men sitting outside what looked like a general store stopped their conversation to watch. A boy, couldn't have been more than 10, stared at her like she'd just grown a second head. Caleb helped her up onto the wagon seat without comment. His hands were gentle, careful not to hold on longer than necessary. Then he walked around to the other side and climbed up beside her, and suddenly the space felt very small. "It's about an hour to the ranch," he said, picking up the reins. "We can talk on the way, or we can ride quiet. Your choice." Elena swallowed hard. "What do people here know about me?" He didn't answer right away. The wagon lurched forward, and she grabbed the seat to steady herself. "I told them I was bringing a wife," he finally said. "Didn't tell them much else, because there wasn't much else to tell. You didn't put your whole life story in your letter." "No," she agreed quietly. "I didn't. And I didn't ask for one." She looked at him then, really looked at him. His profile was all hard angles, but there was something in the set of his jaw that wasn't meanness, more like someone who'd learned not to expect much from people and had made peace with that. "Why?" she asked. "Why didn't you ask?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. They were leaving the town behind now, heading into open country that stretched out flat and endless under a sky so big it made her dizzy. "Because everybody's got things they'd rather not talk about," he said finally. "Figured if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me when you were ready. And if you never wanted me to know, that was your business." Something in her chest loosened just a little. Not much, but enough to let her breathe. "I'm not who people think I am," she heard herself say. "Back where I came from, they said things about me. Terrible things. And some of them were lies, but some of them—" She stopped, couldn't make herself finish. "Did you hurt anyone?" "No." "Steal anything?" "No." "Kill anyone?" "No." He nodded like that settled it. "Then I don't need to know the rest. Not unless you want to tell me." She didn't know what to do with that. With someone who didn't need her to explain herself or justify her existence. She'd spent so long defending herself, denying things, trying to prove she wasn't what people said she was, that this felt like standing on ground that wasn't quite solid. "What about you?" she asked, partly because she was curious and partly because she needed to turn this conversation away from herself. "Why did you need to send away for a wife? Town like that must have women." "It does," he agreed, "and they're all either married, or they're the daughters of people I've known my whole life, or they're waiting for something better than a man who spends most of his time talking to cattle." "You don't talk much to people?" "Not if I can help it." "Then why get married at all?" He was quiet again, and she was starting to recognize that as his way of thinking before he spoke. She appreciated it, actually. Too many people just said whatever came into their heads and sorted it out later. "The ranch is too much for one person," he said. "I need help that I can count on, and I'm tired of eating my own cooking." He glanced at her sideways. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Any good at it?" "I won't poison you, if that's what you're asking." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "That's a start." They rode in silence for a while after that. Elena watched the landscape roll by, so different from Missouri, where everything had been green and close and familiar. This was open in a way that felt both terrifying and liberating, like you could disappear into all that space and no one would ever find you. Like you could start over and actually mean it. "What do you expect from me?" she finally asked. "You said in your letter you needed a partner. What does that mean?" Caleb seemed to consider this carefully. "Means I expect you to pull your weight. The ranch doesn't run itself, and I can't do everything alone. Means I expect honesty. If something's not working, you tell me instead of letting it fester. And means I expect you to stay. I'm not interested in someone who's going to run off the first time things get difficult. And what do I get in return? A place to live. Food to eat. My name, if that matters to you. Protection." He paused. "Respect. I won't ask you to be something you're not, and I won't treat you like property. We're partners, like I said. That means equals." Elena felt something twist in her chest. "I've never been anyone's equal before." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Understanding. "Then I guess we're both trying something new," he said. The ranch appeared gradually, rising out of the flat land like it had grown there naturally. It wasn't much. A house that was more functional than pretty, a barn that had seen better days, some outbuildings that looked like they were held together by determination and prayer. But it was solid, real. And it was hers now, in a way nothing had been hers for a very long time. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and sat there for a moment, like he was seeing it through her eyes and trying to figure out what she thought. "It's not fancy," he said. "I don't need fancy. It's clean, that I can promise you." She climbed down from the wagon before he could help her, needing to feel her own feet on this ground. The dirt here was different from the dirt in town, darker, richer. She knelt and pressed her palm against it, feeling the warmth from the sun that had soaked in deep. "Elena?" She looked up at him, this stranger who was now her husband, this man who'd offered her a chance when no one else would. "Thank you," she said quietly. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Haven't done anything yet." "You didn't ask questions? That's something." He picked up her carpet bag and jerked his head toward the house. "Come on, I'll show you around." The inside of the house was exactly what she'd expected. Spare and practical, with none of the softness that came from a woman's touch. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once. There was a fireplace built from river stones, a table with 2 chairs that didn't match, a rocking chair that looked older than either of them. Everything was clean, like he'd promised, but it had the feel of a place where someone lived alone and had stopped caring about much beyond the basics. "Bedroom's through there," Caleb said, pointing to a door on the right. "I'll sleep in the loft." He pointed up at a ladder leading to an open space above. "Unless—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "I mean, we can figure out how you want to handle that." Elena felt her face heat. They hadn't talked about this part. His letter had been clear that he was looking for a wife, not just a housekeeper, but he'd also said he wouldn't force anything. And now here they were, 2 strangers standing in a house that was supposed to be theirs, trying to navigate something neither of them knew how to name. "The loft is fine," she said quietly. "For now." He nodded, relief obvious on his face. "There's a pump out back for water. Privy's beyond that. We've got chickens. They're half wild, but they lay decent eggs if you can catch them at it. Vegetable garden could use some attention. I'm better with animals than plants. I can handle a garden." "Figured you might?" He set her bag down by the bedroom door. "You should rest. It's been a long trip." "What about you? Don't you have work to do?" "Always have work to do, but it can wait an hour." She could see how hard it was for him to say that, to put her needs ahead of the ranch, even for a short time. It made her want to prove she wasn't going to be a burden. "I'd rather help," she said. "If that's all right. I don't want to just sit here thinking." He studied her for a moment. "You sure?" "I'm sure." "All right then. Can you handle horses?" "I grew up on a farm. I can handle most animals." "Good. We'll start with feeding, then I'll show you the rest." He led her out to the barn, which smelled like hay and horses and hard work. There were 3 horses in the stalls, the 2 that had pulled the wagon and a third, a big roan gelding that stamped when they approached. "That's Red," Caleb said. "He's mean-tempered, but he works hard. These 2 are Molly and Sam. They're gentle enough if you don't spook them." Elena stepped up to Molly's stall and held out her hand, letting the mare sniff her. "Hey there, pretty girl." Molly whickered softly and pushed her nose into Elena's palm. "She likes you," Caleb observed. "That's a good sign. Molly doesn't like most people." "Animals are easier than people," Elena said without thinking. "They don't judge you." "No," Caleb agreed. "They don't." They worked in companionable silence after that, filling water buckets and distributing hay. Elena found a rhythm in it, something soothing about the simple physical tasks that didn't require conversation or explanation. Caleb moved through the work with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, but he was patient when she didn't know where things were, showing her without making her feel stupid for asking. By the time they finished, the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "You hungry?" Caleb asked. Elena realized she was. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and that had been nothing but some bread and cheese she'd been rationing. "Yes. I'll start something." "I can do it," she interrupted. "You said you needed help with cooking. Might as well start now." He looked like he wanted to argue, then thought better of it. "Supplies are in the larder. It's the small room off the kitchen. There's not much, but there's enough for tonight." The larder was better stocked than she'd expected. Flour, salt, dried beans, some preserved vegetables, a cured ham hanging from a hook. She found potatoes and onions in a basket on the floor, and her mind started putting together a meal. She worked while Caleb sat at the table and watched her, which should have made her nervous, but somehow didn't. There was nothing predatory in the way he looked at her. He was just a man who'd been alone for a long time, watching someone else move through his space and maybe trying to imagine what it would be like to not be alone anymore. "How long have you lived here?" she asked as she chopped onions. "Built the house 6 years ago. Worked for someone else before that, saved up enough to buy the land." "No family?" "Not anymore. My parents passed when I was young, grew up in an orphanage in Denver, then struck out on my own when I was old enough." Elena's hand stilled on the knife. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." He paused. "What about you?" "My mother died 2 years ago. Never knew my father. He left before I was born." "No siblings?" "No, just me." She started dicing the potatoes, letting the rhythm of the knife against the cutting board fill the silence. It was easier to talk about difficult things when you had something to do with your hands. "Is that why you left?" Caleb asked. "After your mother died?" Elena took a slow breath. "Partly. Mostly it was because people wouldn't let me stay. Not after—" She stopped, the knife frozen mid-cut. "There was a man. He was married, and he told people that we—" She couldn't make herself say it. It wasn't true. But his wife believed him, and then everyone else believed him, and suddenly I was the woman who broke up a marriage, the woman who couldn't be trusted, the woman who— "Stop," Caleb said, and his voice was hard enough that she looked up at him. "I told you I don't need to know, and if I did need to know, I'd rather hear it when you're ready to tell it, not when you're forcing yourself to get it over with." Elena set down the knife before she cut herself. Her hands were shaking. "You don't want to know what people said about me?" "I want to know you," he said. "Not what people said about you. There's a difference." She had to look away from him because the kindness in his voice was almost harder to bear than the cruelty she'd gotten used to. She picked up the knife again and went back to the potatoes, dicing them into smaller and smaller pieces until Caleb reached over and gently took the knife from her hand. "I think they're small enough," he said. She laughed and it came out wet. "I think you're right." They ate at the table as the light outside faded to purple and then to black. The meal was simple: fried potatoes and onions, thick slices of ham, bread that Caleb had bought from someone in town who knew how to make it better than he did. But it tasted better than anything Elena had eaten in months, maybe because it was the first meal she'd had in a long time that didn't taste like fear. "This is good," Caleb said, and she could tell he meant it. "It's just potatoes." "It's better than what I usually make." After dinner, Elena washed the dishes while Caleb brought in more firewood for the morning. The house was cooling down now that the sun was gone, and she was grateful for the warmth from the stove. When everything was clean and put away, she found herself standing in the middle of the main room, unsure what to do next. Caleb came back in with an armload of wood and stopped when he saw her expression. "You all right?" "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "I don't know how this works." He set down the wood and brushed off his hands. "There's no rules. You do what feels right. And if nothing feels right, then you do what feels least wrong, and tomorrow you try again." She pulled her arms tight around herself. "I'm not good at this, at being with people." "You think I am?" He gestured around the empty house. "I've been alone for 6 years because I'm better at talking to horses than humans. If there was a manual for how to suddenly live with someone, I'd have bought it already." Despite everything, that made her smile. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? Could be worse. Could be better." "Could be," he agreed. "But we're starting somewhere, and that's more than nothing." Elena went to the bedroom, her bedroom now, though it didn't feel like hers yet, and changed into her nightdress. The bed was bigger than the one she'd had in Missouri, and the mattress was surprisingly comfortable. She could hear Caleb moving around in the loft above, the creak of floorboards as he settled in. She lay in the darkness and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of this new place. The wind moving through the grass, the distant call of some night bird, the house settling around her like it was getting used to her presence the same way she was getting used to its. For the first time in 2 years, she wasn't lying awake wondering where she'd go next. Wasn't planning her next escape, her next name, her next desperate attempt to outrun her past. She was just here, and maybe, just maybe, here could be enough. The rooster woke her before dawn, screaming like the world was ending. Elena jolted upright, heart pounding, before she remembered where she was. Not Missouri, not the cramped boarding house where she'd spent her last few months, not the stagecoach, Red Hollow, Caleb's ranch, her new life, or whatever this was going to be. She dressed quickly in her practical dress, the brown one that wouldn't show dirt, and came out to find Caleb already up, coffee made, standing by the window and looking out at the pre-dawn gray. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Morning. There's coffee. Mugs are in the cabinet." She poured herself a cup and stood beside him, following his gaze out to where the land was just starting to take shape in the growing light. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It's hard," he corrected. "But yeah, sometimes it's beautiful too." They drank their coffee in silence, and Elena realized this was going to be part of their rhythm, these quiet moments in the morning before the day started demanding things from them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was just what it was. "I need to ride out and check the herd today," Caleb said eventually. "You can come with me if you want, or you can stay here and work on whatever needs doing around the house. Your choice." Elena thought about it. Part of her wanted to stay, to make this place feel more like a home, to prove she could handle the domestic work. But a bigger part of her didn't want to be left alone yet, didn't want to spend the day wondering if he'd come back or if this was all some elaborate setup for abandonment. "I'll come with you," she said. He nodded like he'd expected that. "You'll want to change. That dress won't work for riding." "I don't have anything else." He frowned, then went to a trunk in the corner and pulled out a pair of worn trousers and a shirt. "These were mine when I was younger. They'll be big on you, but they'll work better than a dress." Elena took them, expecting to feel embarrassed, but instead just felt grateful. "Thank you." She changed in the bedroom, rolling up the pant legs and tucking the shirt in as best she could. When she came out, Caleb gave her an appraising look. "You look like a kid playing dress-up." "I feel like a kid playing dress-up." "You'll do." They saddled the horses in the pre-dawn quiet. Caleb gave her Molly, the gentle mare, and took Red for himself. Elena swung up into the saddle with the muscle memory of someone who'd learned to ride young and hadn't forgotten, even though it had been a while. "You ride well," Caleb observed. "I told you I grew up on a farm." "People say a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're all true." They rode out as the sun crested the horizon, turning the whole world gold and infinite. Elena had never seen so much space in her life. It stretched out in every direction without fence or building or tree to break it up, just grass and sky and the mountains in the far distance, purple and impossible. "How much land do you have, Vo?" she asked. 200 acres. Not the biggest spread around, but it's mine." "How many cattle?" "About 60 head right now. I'm hoping to build it up over the next few years. That's part of why I needed help." They rode for almost an hour before they found the herd, scattered across a shallow valley where a creek cut through the grass. The cattle looked up when they approached, then went back to grazing, unconcerned. Caleb did a slow count, his eyes moving methodically across the herd. Elena watched him work, noting the way he sat his horse like he'd been born to it, the easy competence in everything he did. "We're missing 3, he finally said. "How can you tell?" "I know my cattle." He dismounted and walked the perimeter of the herd, reading the ground like it was a book written in hoofprints and disturbed grass. Elena stayed on Molly and watched, fascinated despite herself. "There's," he said, pointing east. 3 sets of tracks heading that way. Probably went looking for better grass and wandered off." "Do we go after them?" "We go after them." They tracked the missing cattle for another hour, following a trail that led them deeper into rougher country. The land here was broken up with gullies and rock formations, harder to navigate, and Elena found herself working to keep Molly steady. "There," Caleb said, pointing to where 3 cows were standing in a narrow canyon, looking confused about how they'd gotten there. "How do we get them out?" "Carefully." It took another hour of patient work, Caleb riding in to turn them, Elena positioning herself to keep them from bolting the wrong direction. But eventually they got all three headed back toward the main herd. By the time they rejoined the others, the sun was high and Elena's back was aching from all the riding. "You did good," Caleb said as they watched the reunited herd. "I didn't do much." "You did what was needed. That's the same thing." They ate lunch sitting on the ground, bread and cheese that Caleb had brought in his saddlebag. Elena's legs were already sore, and she knew she'd be even sorer tomorrow, but there was something satisfying about the physical tiredness. It was honest, earned. "What made you decide to answer my letter?" Caleb asked suddenly. Elena took her time chewing and swallowing, using the food as an excuse to think. "I didn't have anywhere else to go, and your letter was different from the others." "Others?" "I looked at several advertisements. Most of them were men looking for someone to cook and clean, and—" She stopped. "You were the only one who said you wanted a partner. Did you believe me?" "I wanted to believe you." He nodded slowly. "What if I turn out to be lying? What if this is all a performance, and once you're settled, I change?" Elena met his eyes. "Then I'll leave." "Just like that? Just like that? I've left before. I can do it again." "You say that like it was easy." "I say that like it was necessary." They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, both of them tired and dusty and comfortable in the silence between them. When they unsaddled the horses, Elena moved through the work with confidence now, knowing where things went, how Caleb liked things done. "I need to go into town tomorrow," he said as they walked back to the house. "We need supplies. You should come." Elena's stomach clenched. "Do I have to?" "No, but people are going to talk no matter what. Might as well let them see you're not hiding." "I'm not ready." "You don't have to be ready. You just have to show up." That night, after another simple meal, Elena sat in the rocking chair while Caleb read a week-old newspaper he'd gotten from somewhere. The chair creaked rhythmically as she moved, and the sound was soothing in a way she couldn't explain. "What happens if people in town don't accept me?" she asked into the quiet. Caleb looked up from the paper. "What do you mean? What happens if they hear about Missouri? About what people said I did?" "They probably will hear, towns like this, news travels. And it doesn't matter. How can you say that?" He folded the paper carefully, giving her his full attention. "Because I'm not married to what people think about you. I'm married to you. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me." Elena felt something sharp and hot behind her eyes. "You don't even know me. I know you work hard. I know you don't complain. I know you're honest enough to tell me you're scared instead of pretending you're not. That's more than I know about most people in town, and I've lived near them my whole life." She looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. "What if I disappoint you? What if you don't?" "I'm serious, Caleb. So am I." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Listen, Elena, I don't know what happened to you before you came here. Don't know what people said or did, or whether any of it was true. But I know you got on a stagecoach and traveled 3 days to a place you'd never been to, marry a man you'd never met. That takes courage. And I'd rather have someone courageous who makes mistakes than someone perfect who never tries anything. I'm not courageous. You're here, aren't you?" She didn't have an answer for that. That night, lying in bed, Elena thought about courage. She'd never considered herself brave. Brave people stood and fought. She'd always been the person who ran, who hid, who changed her name and hoped distance would be enough to outrun the damage. But maybe Caleb was right. Maybe getting on that stagecoach had been brave, even if it felt like the coward's way out. Maybe staying here, in this raw new place with this quiet man who asked so little and offered so much, was brave too. Or maybe it was just the only option left. Either way, she was here. And tomorrow, she'd have to face Red Hollow again. The wagon rattled into Red Hollow just after 10, and Elena felt every eye in town turn toward them like compass needles finding north. She'd braided her hair that morning until her scalp ached, pinned it so tight nothing could come loose, worn the dress that was supposed to be nice but just made her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Beside her, Caleb drove with the same steady calm he brought to everything. Like riding into town with a mail-order bride was the most natural thing in the world. "Breathe," he said quietly, without looking at her. She hadn't realized she'd stopped. The general store was their first stop, a sprawling wooden building with a porch where men liked to congregate and pretend they had important things to discuss. Today there were 4 of them, older men with sun-damaged faces and opinions they'd formed before breakfast and wouldn't change before death. They all stopped talking when Caleb pulled the wagon up. "Wait here," Caleb said, setting the brake. "I can come in." "I know you can. I'm saying you don't have to." But Elena was already climbing down, her boots hitting the dirt with more force than necessary. If she was going to be stared at, she might as well give them something to look at. Caleb gave her a long look, then just shook his head and led the way up the steps. The men parted like water, not quite looking at her, but not quite looking away either. Elena kept her chin up and her eyes forward and followed Caleb through the door. The inside of the store smelled like coffee and leather, and the particular mustiness that came from too many dry goods packed into too small a space. Behind the counter stood a woman who had to be 60 if she was a day, with hair pulled back so tight it looked painful and eyes that missed nothing. "Caleb," she said, her voice neutral in a way that felt deliberate. "Mrs. Patterson. And this must be the wife. Not your wife. Just the wife, like Elena was a category rather than a person." "Elena Ward," Caleb said. "Elena, this is Mrs. Patterson. She runs the store." Elena forced herself to step forward, to extend her hand. "It's nice to meet you." Mrs. Patterson looked at the offered hand like it might bite her, then took it briefly. Her palm was dry and cool. "Welcome to Red Hollow." The words were right, but the tone suggested Elena was about as welcome as a rattlesnake in a hen house. "Thank you," Elena managed. "We need the usual supplies," Caleb said, pulling a list from his pocket, "plus some extra flour, coffee, and whatever vegetables you've got that are still good." Mrs. Patterson took the list and examined it with the focus of someone reading a legal document. "This'll take a few minutes to put together." "We'll wait." Mrs. Patterson disappeared into the back room, and Elena found herself alone with Caleb in a space that suddenly felt too small. She could hear voices through the wall, Mrs. Patterson talking to someone, though she couldn't make out the words. "She doesn't like me," Elena said quietly. "She doesn't know you." That's not going to stop her from making up her mind. Caleb turned to look at her fully. "Probably not, but her opinion doesn't matter as much as she thinks it does." The bell above the door jangled and a woman came in, younger than Mrs. Patterson, maybe 35, with blonde hair escaping from a bun and flour dusted across her apron. She stopped when she saw them, her eyes going wide. "Oh," she said, "you must be Caleb's wife." Elena nodded, bracing for judgment. But the woman smiled instead, bright and genuine. "I'm Sarah Miller. My husband Tom and I run the mill just outside town. We've been wondering when Caleb would bring you by." "This is Elena," Caleb said, and there was something in his voice, relief, maybe, or gratitude that someone was being kind. "It's nice to meet people," Elena said carefully. "I'm sure it is. Moving somewhere new is never easy." Sarah glanced toward the back room where Mrs. Patterson had disappeared, then lowered her voice. "Don't mind Margaret. She's suspicious of everyone until she decides they're worth knowing. Give her time." "How much time?" Sarah laughed. "With Margaret? Could be weeks. Could be years. But she'll come around eventually." Mrs. Patterson emerged from the back with a crate of supplies, and Sarah immediately straightened up, the conspiratorial warmth fading into something more careful. "Sarah," Mrs. Patterson said, "did you need something?" "Just checking if the flour I ordered came in." "Not yet. Should be on next week's delivery." "All right then. I'll check back." Sarah gave Elena a quick smile. "Nice meeting you, Elena. You should come by the mill sometime. I'll show you around." After she left, the store felt colder somehow. Mrs. Patterson began tallying up their supplies with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more before she died. "That'll be $8.40, she said when she'd finished. Caleb counted out the money while Elena stood there feeling useless. She wanted to help load the supplies, to do something other than be looked at, but the crate was already heavy with goods, and Caleb was already lifting it like it weighed nothing. "I'll bring the wagon around," he said. Elena nodded and found herself alone with Mrs. Patterson again. The silence stretched between them like taffy. "You're from back east," Mrs. Patterson finally said. Not a question. "Missouri. Long way to come for a husband. Long way to come for a lot of things. Mrs. Patterson's eyes narrowed slightly. We don't get many newcomers here, and the ones we do get usually have a reason for leaving wherever they came from. Elena felt her spine straighten. I imagine everyone who comes west has a reason. Some reasons are better than others. I suppose that's true. They stared at each other across the counter, and Elena refused to be the first to look away. She'd spent 2 years being stared down, being made to feel small, being pushed out of spaces she had every right to occupy. She was tired of it. Finally, Mrs. Patterson sniffed and turned away to rearrange something on a shelf that didn't need rearranging. Caleb's a good man, works hard, keeps to himself. Yes, Elena agreed carefully. He deserves someone who'll treat him right. I intend to. Intentions and actions aren't always the same thing. Before Elena could respond, Caleb came back through the door. He took in the scene, Elena standing rigid by the counter, Mrs. Patterson with her back turned, and his jaw tightened. We ready? He asked. Ready, Elena confirmed. They loaded the supplies in silence, and Elena was grateful when they could finally leave. As they pulled away from the store, she looked back and saw Mrs. Patterson watching from the window, her expression unreadable. That went well, Elena said, and couldn't quite keep the bitterness out of her voice. She'll warm up. Will she? Because it felt like she'd already decided exactly who I am. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Margaret Patterson's husband ran off 15 years ago with a woman from Cheyenne. Left her with 3 kids and a store to run. She's got her reasons for being careful about strangers. Elena absorbed that. And I'm supposed to pay for what some other woman did? No, but understanding why someone acts the way they do makes it easier to live with them. I don't want to just live with it. I'm tired of people assuming the worst about me. Then show them different. I've been trying to show people different for 2 years. It doesn't work. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in the middle of the empty street. Elena, look at me. She did, reluctantly. You're not in Missouri anymore. Whatever happened there, whatever people said about you, it hasn't followed you here. Not yet. So you can either act like it has and make everyone suspicious, or you can hold your head up and give them a chance to know you before they judge you. And if they judge me anyway, then at least you'll know you tried. They were still sitting there when a boy came running up to the wagon, breathless and red-faced. He couldn't have been more than 8, with hair sticking up in every direction and a gap where he'd lost a front tooth. Mr. Rourke? He panted. My ma says, can you come look at our cow? She's not eating, and Pa's worried she might be sick. Caleb glanced at Elena, then back at the boy. Where's your place, Tommy? Just past the church. The house with the blue door. All right. Tell your ma I'll be there in a few minutes. The boy grinned and took off running. Caleb picked up the reins again. You know anything about sick cattle? He asked Elena. Some. My uncle raised dairy cows. Good, because I could use another pair of eyes. The house with the blue door turned out to belong to a family named Brennan, Tom and Kate, and 4 children ranging from Tommy down to a baby who couldn't have been more than 6 months old. Kate Brennan came out to meet them, wiping her hands on her apron, looking tired in the way that came from never having enough hours in the day. Caleb, thank you for coming. I know you're busy. She stopped when she saw Elena. Oh, I didn't know you'd bring company. This is my wife, Elena. Elena, Kate Brennan. Kate's face transformed. Your wife? I didn't even know you were getting married. When did this happen? Few days ago, Caleb said, climbing down from the wagon. Now where's this cow? Kate led them around to the back where a sad-looking Jersey was standing in a small pen, her head down and ribs showing. Caleb knelt by the fence and studied her for a long moment. How long has she been like this? He asked. 3 days now. She was fine, and then she just stopped eating. Tom's afraid we're going to lose her, and she's the only milk cow we've got. Elena climbed down from the wagon and walked over to the pen. The cow lifted her head slightly, then lowered it again. Can I go in? Elena asked. If you want, Kate said doubtfully. Elena climbed over the fence and approached the cow slowly, talking to her in a low voice. The cow didn't move away, which Elena took as a good sign. She ran her hands along the cow's sides, feeling for swelling or heat or anything that might indicate sickness. Her stomach's distended, Elena called back to Caleb. And she's grinding her teeth. I think she might have bloat. Caleb stood and came over to the fence. You sure? Not completely. but it looks like what I saw in my uncle's herd a few times. What do we do? Kate asked, wringing her hands. Elena looked at Caleb. We need to get her up and moving, and we might need to tube her. You know how to do that? I've seen it done. Never did it myself. That's better than nothing. Caleb climbed into the pen. Tom, he called toward the house. We need your help out here. Tom Brennan appeared a minute later, a thin man with work-roughened hands and worry etched into every line of his face. Between the three of them, they got the cow up and moving, walking her in slow circles while she protested weakly. We need a length of hose, Elena said, and some water. Tom ran to get what she needed while Caleb kept the cow moving. Kate stood by the fence, watching with her baby on her hip and hope written all over her face. You really think you can help her? Kate asked. I hope so, Elena said honestly, but I can't promise anything. When Tom came back with the hose, Elena's hands were shaking. She'd watched her uncle do this procedure half a dozen times, but watching and doing were two very different things. Still, she took the hose and made herself move with confidence she didn't feel. Hold her steady, she told Caleb. It took 3 tries to get the tube down the cow's throat properly, and by the time Elena heard the telltale rush of gas escaping, she was sweating despite the cool morning air. The cow shuddered, then let out a long, rattling breath. After a few minutes, her head came up a little higher. Is that good? Tom asked. That's good, Caleb confirmed. She should start feeling better now. Keep walking her for another hour or so, and she'll probably want water and food by this afternoon. Kate looked like she might cry from relief. Thank you, both of you. I don't know what we would have done if we'd lost her. You would have managed, Caleb said simply, but I'm glad you didn't have to. As they were washing up at the pump, Kate came over with a basket covered in a checkered cloth. I know it's not much, she said, handing it to Elena. But I baked bread this morning, and there's some butter and jam. Please take it. Elena started to protest, then saw the look on Kate's face and realized this wasn't charity. It was pride. It was Kate's way of making the exchange even. Thank you, Elena said, taking the basket. That's very kind. You saved our cow. It's the least I can do. Kate paused, then added, You should come to the church social next month. It's a good way to meet people. Elena glanced at Caleb, who gave a slight nod. Maybe I will, Elena said. On the way back to the ranch, with the basket of bread sitting between them, Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly. She wasn't ready for that yet. But maybe the absence of complete despair, which was close enough. You did good back there, Caleb said. I was terrified. Being scared and doing it anyway. That's what courage looks like. You keep saying I'm brave. I don't feel brave. That's usually how it works. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels cutting tracks through the dust. Elena watched the landscape roll by and thought about Kate Brennan's tired face transforming into relief, about Sarah Miller's genuine smile, about even Mrs. Patterson's suspicion, which at least meant she cared enough to be protective of her town. Caleb? Elena said eventually. Yeah? Thank you for bringing me with you today, for not making me stay at the ranch. I told you, partners. I know what you said, but a lot of men say things they don't mean. I'm not a lot of men. No, Elena agreed quietly. You're not. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Elena would wake before dawn and have coffee ready by the time Caleb came down from the loft. They'd work through breakfast, him planning his day, her making a list of what needed doing around the house and garden. Then they'd separate, him to the cattle and her to the endless tasks that came with running a household in the middle of nowhere. The garden was in worse shape than Caleb had let on. Half the plants were choked with weeds, the other half were struggling in soil that hadn't been properly tended in years. Elena spent 3 full days on her hands and knees, pulling weeds and turning soil and trying to salvage what could be saved. By the end of it, her back was screaming and her hands were blistered, but she could see rows of vegetables that might actually produce something edible. The chickens were another challenge. Caleb had been right about them being half wild. They scattered every time Elena came near, and getting eggs felt like a daily battle. But she was patient, and she was stubborn, and eventually they started to tolerate her presence. It was during one of these egg-collecting expeditions that she heard the wagon coming up the road. She straightened up, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw Sarah Miller driving a small cart with a boy of about 12 beside her. Hello, Sarah called, waving. I hope we're not interrupting. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to meet them. Not at all. Caleb's out with the herd, but he should be back soon. Actually, we came to see you. Sarah climbed down from the cart and the boy followed. This is my son, David. David, this is Mrs. Rourke. The boy mumbled a greeting, looking at his feet. We heard in town about you helping Kate Brennan's cow, Sarah continued. Everyone's impressed. Not many people would have known what to do. Elena felt her face heat. I just did what my uncle taught me. Well, it was the right thing. And it got people talking, in a good way. Sarah reached into the cart and pulled out a bundle wrapped in brown paper. I brought you some fabric. I thought you might want to make some new dresses. Living on a ranch is hard on clothes. Elena took the bundle, surprised by the weight of it. I can't accept this. Of course you can. Consider it a welcome gift. But I barely know you. Sarah's expression softened. That's exactly why I'm giving it to you. Because you're new here, and new is hard, and everyone deserves at least one person who makes it easier. She paused. Plus, I remember what it was like when I first moved here. If someone had brought me fabric, I would have cried from gratitude. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come visit me at the mill sometime. I could use the company. Being around flour dust all day makes a person desperate for conversation. After they left, Elena sat on the porch steps with the bundle in her lap and let herself cry just a little. Not from sadness, but from the unfamiliar feeling of being seen as something other than a problem to be solved or a scandal to be avoided. When Caleb came back that evening, dusty and tired, he found her in the kitchen working on dinner. She'd made stew from the vegetables in the garden and bread from Kate Brennan's recipe, and the whole house smelled like something worth coming home to. Sarah Miller stopped by today, Elena said as they ate. Yeah? She brought me fabric, said it was a welcome gift. Caleb smiled slightly. Sarah's good people. Her husband, too. Why is she being so nice to me? She doesn't even know me. Maybe that's why. No preconceptions, she's just seeing you as you are. Elena pushed her stew around on her plate. What if who I am isn't good enough? Then she'll figure that out and adjust. But so far, seems like you're doing fine. I helped one cow. That doesn't make me a good person. No, Caleb agreed. But it doesn't make you a bad one either. And that's a start. The following week, Elena made her second trip into town. This time, she went alone, driving the wagon herself while Caleb stayed back to work on a fence that needed mending. She'd been nervous about it, but he'd insisted she needed to learn the route. And besides, she couldn't avoid town forever. The general store was busy when she arrived, full of women buying supplies and trading gossip. Elena took a deep breath and walked in. Mrs. Patterson looked up from where she was measuring out flour for a customer. Mrs. Rourke. Mrs. Patterson, I have a list. I'll get to it when I'm finished here. Elena nodded and stepped aside to wait. The other women in the store had gone quiet, watching her with undisguised curiosity. She recognized Kate Brennan in the corner with her baby, and Kate gave her a warm smile. Elena, Kate said, coming over. How's everything at the ranch? Good. Busy, but good. I wanted to thank you again for helping with Bessie. She's eating normal now, and her milk production is back up. I'm glad to hear it. One of the other women, older with steel gray hair and a pinched expression, spoke up. You're the one from back east, aren't you? Missouri, Elena confirmed. That's quite a journey. What made you come all this way? Elena could feel the trap in the question, the invitation to reveal something that could be used against her later. Opportunity, she said carefully. What kind of opportunity? The kind that lets a person start fresh. The woman's eyes narrowed. Running from something, then. Everyone who comes west is running from something, Elena said evenly. That's kind of the point. Before the woman could respond, a voice came from the back of the store. Martha, leave the girl alone. A woman emerged from between the shelves, younger than Martha, maybe 40, with dark hair streaked with gray and hands stained with what looked like ink. Not everyone needs to justify their existence to you. Martha sniffed. I was just making conversation, Ruth. You were being nosy. There's a difference. Ruth turned to Elena. I'm Ruth Callahan. I run the newspaper, such as it is. You must be Caleb's wife. Elena Ward. Well, Elena Rourke now. Pleased to meet you. I've been meaning to come by and introduce myself, but I've been behind on deadline. Ruth glanced at Martha, who was still hovering disapprovingly. Don't mind Martha. She thinks everyone should explain themselves in triplicate before they're allowed to exist in peace. I just think people should be honest about who they are, Martha said stiffly. And I think people are entitled to privacy, Ruth countered. Revolutionary concept, I know. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the back room with Elena's order. That'll be $4.15. Elena paid and collected her supplies, grateful for the excuse to leave. But as she was loading the wagon, a girl approached her, maybe 16, with red hair and braids and freckles scattered across her nose like stars. Mrs. Rourke? The girl said hesitantly. Yes? I'm Emma Prescott. I heard you can read. Elena blinked at the non sequitur. Yes, I can read. Can you teach people? To read, I mean? I suppose I could. Why? Emma's face flushed. I'm 16 and I can barely read. My pa needed me to work instead of going to school, and now I feel stupid every time someone expects me to read something. She rushed on before Elena could respond. Mrs. Miller said you seemed like someone who'd be patient about it. And I can pay. Not much, but something. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. Here was this girl, brave enough to admit what she didn't know, asking for help from a complete stranger. You don't need to pay me, Elena said. Come by the ranch next Saturday afternoon. We'll start then. Emma's whole face lit up. Really? You mean it? I mean it. Thank you, Mrs. Rourke. Thank you so much. The girl practically skipped away, and Elena stood by the wagon trying to process what had just happened. She'd come to town expecting judgment and had found it in Martha. But she'd also found Kate's gratitude, Ruth's defense, and Emma's trust. Maybe Caleb had been right. Maybe showing up was enough. When she got back to the ranch and told Caleb about Emma, he listened without interrupting, then nodded slowly. You gonna do it? He asked. I said I would. That's not what I asked. Elena thought about it. Yes, I'm gonna do it. She deserves a chance to learn. She does, Caleb agreed. And you deserve a chance to be more than what people back in Missouri decided you were. That Saturday, Emma showed up exactly on time, clutching a worn primer and looking terrified. Elena made tea and they sat at the kitchen table, and for 2 hours Elena remembered what it felt like to be useful for something other than manual labor. Emma was bright but frustrated by her own limitations, and Elena had to keep reminding her to be patient with herself. I'm too old to be learning this, Emma said, after struggling through a simple sentence. You're 16. That's not old. That's barely started. All the other girls my age can read. And now you're learning. That's what matters. By the end of the lesson, Emma could read a full paragraph without help, and her smile was worth every minute of frustration it had taken to get there. Same time next week? Elena asked. Yes, please. And Mrs. Rourke? Thank you for not making me feel stupid. After Emma left, Caleb came in from the barn and found Elena still sitting at the table, staring at the primer. How'd it go? He asked. Good. She's going to be reading full books by winter. And you? Elena looked up at him. What about me? How are you? It was such a simple question, but no one had asked her that in longer than she could remember. Not how was she managing, or coping, or getting by. Just how was she? I think I might be okay, she said slowly. Not good, not yet, but maybe getting there. Caleb pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. You know what I've noticed? What? You smile more than you did when you first got here. Not all the time, but sometimes, when you don't think anyone's looking. Elena hadn't realized that. Is that bad? No, it's good. Means you're not just surviving anymore. Means you're starting to live. She thought about that as she made dinner, as they ate in comfortable silence, as she cleaned up while Caleb read his paper. Was she starting to live? Or was she just getting better at pretending? Either way, she'd agreed to teach Emma, and Kate Brennan had invited her to the church social, and Sarah Miller wanted her to visit the mill. She had things to do here, people who needed her, a place that was starting to feel less like exile and more like possibility. It wasn't perfect. Mrs. Patterson still watched her with suspicion, and Martha What's-Her-Name clearly thought Elena was hiding something scandalous, and every time a stranger looked at her too long, she wondered if somehow, impossibly, they knew. But she was here. She was staying. And for the first time in 2 years, she wasn't planning her next escape route. That had to count for something. The fourth Saturday that Emma came for her reading lesson, she wasn't alone. She brought her younger sister Lucy, a quiet girl of 13 who stood half hidden behind Emma, like she might bolt at any moment. "She wants to learn too," Emma said, apologetic. "I know I should have asked first, but Pa said if I was going, Lucy had to come with me anyway, so I thought." "It's fine," Elena interrupted, stepping aside to let them both in. "The more the merrier." But as she poured tea and set out the books, she felt the weight of what she was building here. Two girls now, sitting at her kitchen table, trusting her to teach them something their own community had failed to provide. What happened when word spread? When more people came? When someone asked questions about her qualifications or her past, or why exactly she'd left Missouri? She pushed the thoughts away and focused on the lesson. Lucy was further behind than Emma had been, could barely sound out simple words, but she had a fierce determination that reminded Elena of herself. By the end of the hour, both girls were reading sentences, stumbling but persistent. After they left, Caleb came in from checking the fence line and found Elena standing at the window watching the girls disappear down the road. "You're thinking too much," he said. "How do you know?" "You get this look, like you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't have a solution yet." Elena turned to face him. "What if this gets bigger? What if more people want lessons?" "Then you teach more people." "I'm not a teacher, Caleb. I barely finished school myself before my mother got sick and I had to work." "You know how to read. That's more than some folks have. And you're patient. That matters more than having some certificate on a wall." "What if someone finds out about Missouri? What if they decide I'm not fit to teach their children?" Caleb set down the tools he'd been carrying and crossed to where she stood. "Then we'll deal with it. But you can't live your whole life waiting for the worst thing to happen. Sometimes you just have to do the thing and see what comes." "That's easy for you to say. You don't have a past chasing you." "Everyone has a past. Mine just didn't follow me to a new town." He paused. "What exactly are you afraid they'll find out?" Elena had been carefully not telling him the details for weeks now, dancing around the edges of her old life without ever naming the center of it. But standing here in this kitchen that was starting to feel like home, with this man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, the secret felt heavier than it had in a long time. "His name was Richard Carver," she said quietly. "He owned the mill where I worked after my mother died. He was married, had 3 children, and he decided he wanted me." Caleb's expression didn't change. "Did you want him?" "No, I needed the job. I couldn't afford to make him angry." "What happened?" Elena wrapped her arms around herself. "He'd find excuses to be alone with me, touch my hand when he didn't need to, stand too close, say things that weren't quite inappropriate enough to report but made my skin crawl. I tried to avoid him, but he was the owner. He controlled everything." "Did he—" Caleb stopped, jaw tight. "Did he hurt you?" "He tried. One night, when everyone else had gone home, he cornered me in the storage room, told me he could make my life very easy or very difficult depending on how I responded." Elena's voice had gone flat, mechanical. She'd told this story before, to people who hadn't believed her. "I fought him off. Hit him with a piece of wood we used to prop open the loading door, gave him a black eye and a split lip, then I ran." "Good," Caleb said fiercely. "I hope it hurt." That surprised her enough that she looked up at him. "You believe me?" "Why wouldn't I?" "Because everyone else believed him. He went home to his wife and told her I'd seduced him, that I'd initiated everything and he'd rejected me, and I'd attacked him out of spite. His wife told the minister. The minister told his congregation. By the time I heard what he was saying about me, the whole town had already decided I was a whore who tried to break up a good Christian family." Caleb's hands had curled into fists. "And no one questioned his story? Why would they? He was Richard Carver, pillar of the community, donated to the church, employed half the town in his mill, and I was just some orphan girl with no family to defend her." Elena felt the old bitterness rising up. "I tried to tell the truth. Went to the minister myself, explained what really happened. He asked me what I'd done to encourage Carver's attention, what I'd been wearing, whether I'd smiled at him or been too friendly. Jesus Christ. After that, it was over. I couldn't keep my job at the mill. Couldn't get work anywhere else. Couldn't walk down the street without people whispering. One of Carver's daughters threw a rock at me in the market, hit me right here." She touched the scar above her left eyebrow, barely visible now, but she felt it every time she looked in a mirror. And when I tried to press charges, the sheriff said there wasn't enough evidence. And maybe I should think about moving somewhere I'd be more comfortable. So you ran. I survived. There's a difference. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his hands slowly unclenching. If I ever meet Richard Carver, I'm going to kill him. Don't say that. I mean it. I know you do. That's why I'm telling you not to say it. Elena moved away from the window, needing distance from the intensity in his eyes. I didn't tell you this so you'd want revenge. I told you because you asked, and because if it's going to come out anyway, you deserve to hear it from me first. It's not going to come out. You don't know that. Red Hollow's 300 miles from Missouri. Who's going to travel that far to spread gossip about someone they don't even know? People travel. Stories travel faster. Then let them travel. You're not that person they described. You're not a homewrecker or a liar or whatever else they called you. You're someone who defended herself and got punished for it. And if anyone in this town has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that distance and time and a new name would be enough. But she'd learned the hard way that the past had long fingers and a longer memory. Still, for now, she had this. This kitchen, this man, this life she was building one careful day at a time. It would have to be enough. 3 weeks later, the past arrived in the form of Victor Hale. Elena was in town alone, picking up supplies and trying not to feel conspicuous about it. She'd gotten better at navigating the social dynamics of Red Hollow, knew which shopkeepers would chat and which preferred silence, knew to avoid Martha Pierce unless absolutely necessary, knew that Ruth Callahan could be counted on for a friendly word when the rest of the town felt hostile. She was loading flour into the wagon when a man she'd never seen before approached. He was well dressed for frontier standards, with a tailored coat and boots that looked expensive, clean-shaven, with pale eyes that took in too much too quickly. "You must be Rourke's new wife," he said without preamble. Elena straightened up, immediately wary. "I am. Victor Hale. I own the ranch north of Caleb's." He extended a hand and Elena shook it briefly. His grip was firm to the point of uncomfortable. "Been meaning to come by and introduce myself, but business keeps me occupied." "That's all right. We've been settling in." "So I hear. Teaching the local children to read." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's admirable. Where'd you say you were from again?" "I didn't say." "Didn't you? Funny, I could have sworn someone mentioned it. Missouri, wasn't it?" Elena's heart started beating faster. "That's right." "What part?" "Small town. You wouldn't have heard of it." "Try me. I've done business all over Missouri." Elena met his eyes, refusing to look away even though every instinct told her to run. "Why does it matter? Just making conversation. New people always interest me, especially when they're married to my neighbors." He leaned against the wagon, too casual. "Caleb's a good man, quiet, keeps to himself. I was surprised when I heard he'd sent for a mail-order bride. Didn't seem like his style." "People surprise you sometimes." "They do indeed." Hale's smile widened. "Well, I won't keep you. Just wanted to say welcome to the area. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other." He tipped his hat and walked away, and Elena stood there with her hands shaking, the bag of flour forgotten. Something about that conversation had felt wrong. Not just unfriendly. Wrong. Like he'd been testing her, looking for cracks in her story. When she got back to the ranch, Caleb was breaking a new horse in the corral. She watched him work for a few minutes, his movements patient and deliberate, and tried to calm the panic that had been building since her encounter with Hale. "You met Victor," Caleb said when he finally noticed her. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "You've got that look again. And Hale's the only person around here who makes people look like that." He tied off the horse and came over to where she stood. "What did he say?" "Asked where I was from, what town in Missouri. Like he was trying to catch me in a lie." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's Hale. He collects information like some people collect stamps, uses it when it benefits him." "Why?" "Because knowledge is power, and Hale likes power." Caleb started walking toward the house, and Elena fell into step beside him. "He's been trying to buy my land for 3 years. Thinks if he owns both ranches, he can control water rights for this whole section. I told him no, and he doesn't take no well." "You think he's going to try to use me against you?" "I think he's going to try. Whether he succeeds is another matter." Elena stopped walking. "Maybe I should leave." before he digs up whatever he's looking for and uses it to hurt you. No. Caleb, I said no. He turned to face her fully. You're not leaving because some petty rancher wants to play games. We knew this might happen, so it's happening. We deal with it. You don't understand. If he finds out about Richard Carver, if he spreads that story here, then we tell the truth. Your version, not Carver's. And if no one believes me, then they don't believe you. But you don't run. Not from this. Not from us. The certainty in his voice made her want to believe him. Made her want to trust that this time would be different. But she'd trusted before and been destroyed for it. Still, she nodded. Because what else could she do? 2 days later, the whispers started. Elena heard them in the general store. 2 women talking in low voices that went silent when they saw her. Felt them in the way Martha Pierce looked at her with something close to vindication. Saw them in how Kate Brennan seemed suddenly uncomfortable when Elena said hello. What are people saying? She asked Ruth Callahan, who at least had the decency to look disgusted about the whole thing. That you left Missouri because you had an affair with a married man. That his wife ran you out of town. Ruth held up a hand before Elena could respond. I don't believe it, for what it's worth. Hale's been spreading poison about everyone who crosses him for years. But people love a scandal. Did he say a name? Richard Carver's name? No, just insinuations. But that's how Hale works. Plants seeds and lets other people's imaginations do the watering. Elena felt sick. I need to tell people the truth. You could, or you could ignore it and let it burn itself out. Town gossip usually does. And if it doesn't? Ruth looked at her seriously. Then you decide whether you care more about what people think or about who you actually are. Because those are 2 different things, and only one of them matters in the long run. Elena tried to take that advice, tried to hold her head high and keep teaching Emma and Lucy, keep helping Kate with her children, keep building the life she'd started here. But everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her, heard conversations stop when she approached, saw the way people who'd been warming up to her suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. The breaking point came 2 weeks later in the middle of the general store, in front of half the town. Elena was buying thread when Martha Pierce's voice cut through the afternoon chatter. I don't understand why we're letting her teach our children, Martha said loudly. A woman with her background. Elena froze, the spool of thread still in her hand. What background is that, Martha? Ruth asked from across the room, her voice sharp. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The affair. The scandal. Women like that don't belong around impressionable young people. Elena turned slowly to face Martha. Her hands were shaking, but her voice came out steady. Women like what? Don't play innocent. We all know what you did in Missouri. Do you? Elena set down the thread and took a step toward Martha. Do you know what I did? Or do you know what someone told you I did? There's no smoke without fire. That's interesting. Because from where I'm standing, the only fire is the one being lit by people who enjoy watching things burn. The store had gone completely silent. Even Mrs. Patterson had stopped counting change. The truth, Elena continued, her voice gaining strength, is that a man in Missouri decided he wanted something he had no right to. And when I told him no, when I fought back, he destroyed my reputation to cover his own guilt. He was rich and respected and married, and I was nobody, so everyone believed him. That's what they all say, Martha sniffed. You're right, that is what we all say. Because it keeps happening, and people like you keep believing the men with power over the women without it. Elena's voice was shaking now, but not with fear, with anger. I came here to start over, to be somewhere that my past didn't define every single day of my future. And maybe that was naive. Maybe there's nowhere far enough to outrun a lie. But I'm done pretending it didn't happen. I'm done being ashamed of defending myself. Well, His name was Richard Carver. He owned a mill in a town called Millbrook. He cornered me in a storage room and tried to force himself on me, and I hit him with a piece of wood. That's what happened. That's the truth. And if you want to condemn me for that, fine. But at least condemn me for what I actually did, not for what some man said I did to save his own skin. The silence after she finished was absolute. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could feel tears threatening but refused to let them fall. She'd said it, put it all out there. And now she'd find out if truth mattered more than rumor. Martha opened her mouth, closed it again, looked around for support that didn't seem to be coming. Even Mrs. Patterson was looking at Elena with something that might have been reassessment. "I think," Ruth said quietly, "that takes a lot of courage to say out loud." "Courage or foolishness," Martha muttered. "Often the same thing." Ruth walked over to stand beside Elena. "I believe her, and I think anyone who's paying attention should believe her too." Kate Brennan stepped forward then, the baby on her hip. "She saved my cow. She's teaching my neighbor's daughters. She's been nothing but kind since she got here." "I believe her too." One by one, other women in the store began nodding. Not all of them. Martha still looked skeptical, and a few others seemed unconvinced. But enough. Enough that Elena could breathe again. She bought her thread with hands that were still shaking and walked out of the store with her head high. She made it to the wagon before her legs gave out, and she had to sit on the buckboard for a solid 5 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. When she got home, Caleb was waiting on the porch. Someone had already ridden out to tell him what happened. "I heard," he said as she climbed down. "From who?" "Tom Miller. He was in town when it happened. Said you faced down half of Red Hollow and didn't blink." I was terrified. "Being terrified and doing it anyway." "I know," Elena interrupted. "That's what courage looks like. You keep telling me that, because it keeps being true." He came down the steps to where she stood. "You all right?" "I don't know. Ask me tomorrow." That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the sounds of the house settling, of Caleb moving around in the loft above, and wondered if she'd made everything better or worse. She'd told the truth, but truth didn't always win. Sometimes it just made you a bigger target. Around midnight, she heard footsteps on the stairs. A soft knock on her bedroom door. "You awake?" Caleb asked through the wood. "Yeah." "Can I come in?" Elena sat up and pulled the quilt around her shoulders. "Okay." He opened the door slowly, carrying a lamp that cast shifting shadows across the walls. He looked tired, worried in a way she wasn't used to seeing. "I've been thinking," he said, staying in the doorway. "About what happened today. About Hale and what he's trying to do. You want me to leave after all?" "What?" "No. Opposite." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I want to make sure he can't use this against us. Against you." "How?" "By making it clear you're not going anywhere. That you're my wife in every sense, not just on paper." He met her eyes. "I think we should go to the church social together. Let everyone see us as a couple. Make it obvious that whatever Hale says, whatever he digs up, it doesn't change how I feel about you." Elena's chest felt tight. "And how do you feel about me?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I feel like you're the bravest person I've ever met. I feel like this ranch became a home again the day you got here. And I feel like if Victor Hale or anyone else tries to drive you away, they're going to have to go through me first." "That's not what I asked." "I know." He stepped into the room, set the lamp on the dresser. "But it's all I've got right now. I'm not good at this. At talking about feelings or making pretty speeches. I just know that when you're here, things make sense. And when I think about you leaving, everything feels wrong." Elena felt something shift in her chest, something loosening that had been locked tight for a very long time. "I'm scared, Caleb." "Of what?" "Of staying, of leaving, of letting this matter too much and having it all fall apart anyway. Then we're both scared, but we're scared together." He held out his hand. "Come with me to the social. Stand beside me and let everyone see that you're not ashamed, and I'm not either." Elena looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and scarred and absolutely steady. Then she reached out and took it. "Okay," she said, "okay." The church social was 3 days away, and Elena spent all 3 of them convinced she was going to be sick. She altered one of the dresses Sarah had given her, trying to make it look like something a respectable rancher's wife would wear. She practiced walking without looking at the ground. She rehearsed conversations in her head where she stayed calm and dignified no matter what people said. None of it helped. The morning of the social, she was so nervous she burned breakfast. Caleb ate the charred eggs without complaint, then told her to go get dressed while he hitched the wagon. "What if everyone stares?" Elena asked for the 3rd time. "They will stare, and we'll let them, and then they'll get bored and find something else to look at." "What if Victor Hale is there?" "He will be there. He never misses a chance to remind everyone he's important." "What if he says something about Missouri?" Caleb set down his fork. Then I'll handle it. That's my job now. You told your truth. That's all you have to do. The social was held in the church hall, a long wooden building with windows that didn't quite fit their frames, and a roof that probably leaked when it rained. By the time Elena and Caleb arrived, it was already crowded with people, families with children running underfoot, old men arguing about cattle prices, women clustered in corners trading recipes and gossip. Every conversation stopped when they walked in. Elena's instinct was to turn around and leave, but Caleb's hand was firm on her back, guiding her forward. They walked through the sudden silence like they were crossing a battlefield, and maybe they were. Sarah Miller was the first to approach, smiling bright. Elena, I'm so glad you came, and you look beautiful. Thank you, Elena managed. Come meet some people. I've been telling everyone how much the girls have improved with their reading. She pulled Elena away from Caleb, introducing her to a succession of women whose names Elena immediately forgot. But they were kind, or at least polite, and that was more than she'd expected. Across the room, Elena could see Caleb talking with Tom Brennan and some other ranchers. And beyond them, standing near the refreshment table with a glass of punch and an expression of calculated interest, was Victor Hale. He caught her looking and raised his glass in a mock salute. Elena turned away, focusing on the conversation happening around her. Something about preserves. Or was it quilting? She'd lost the thread entirely. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else, Ruth Callahan said, appearing at her elbow. Is it that obvious? Only to people who are paying attention, which, granted, is everyone right now. That's not helping, Ruth laughed. No, I suppose it's not. But you're doing fine. Better than fine, actually. You're here, you're standing tall, and you haven't bolted. That's a victory. Doesn't feel like one. It will. Give it time. Elena was trying to figure out how to respond when Victor Hale materialized in front of her. Mrs. Rourke, he said smoothly, enjoying the social. Mr. Hale. I wanted to apologize if my questions the other day seemed intrusive. I'm afraid I have an unfortunate habit of curiosity. Unfortunate for who? His smile sharpened. Fair point, but I do find your story fascinating. Coming all this way to marry a man you'd never met takes courage or desperation. Sometimes they're hard to tell apart. Is there something you want to say to me, Mr. Hale? Just that I admire your boldness. Standing up in the general store like that, telling your version of events. Very dramatic. My version of events is the only version that matters. It's what actually happened. Of course. Though I do wonder, if this Carver fellow were here, would he tell the same story? Elena felt her hands curl into fists. Richard Carver is a liar and a predator. And if he were here, I'd say the same thing to his face. Strong words, but then you seem like a woman who's comfortable with confrontation. Only when necessary. And you think this is necessary? I think you're trying to intimidate me, and I think you should know it's not working. Hale's expression went cold. I'm not trying to intimidate you, Mrs. Rourke. I'm trying to protect this community. We have standards here. And women who seduce married men, that's enough. Caleb's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He'd appeared at Elena's side without her noticing, and the look on his face made Hale take a step back. We were just having a conversation, Hale said. No, you were harassing my wife, and that stops now. I was simply expressing concern. You were spreading lies. Elena didn't seduce anyone. She was attacked, and she defended herself, and the man who attacked her lied about it to save his own reputation. That's what happened. And if you have a problem with that, you can take it up with me. The entire hall had gone quiet again, everyone watching this confrontation unfold. Hale looked around, seemed to realize he'd pushed too far in too public a setting, and forced a smile. No problem at all, just trying to look out for my neighbors. He tipped his hat to Elena. Mrs. Rourke, Caleb, enjoy the rest of your evening. He walked away, but Elena could feel the damage was done. The whole town had just heard Caleb defend her, which meant the whole town now knew exactly what she'd been accused of back in Missouri. I need air, Elena said. She walked out of this hall before anyone could stop her, before the tears could start, before she had to face the whispers that would start the moment she was gone. Outside, the evening air was cool and clear, and she stood there gulping it down like she'd been drowning. Caleb came out a minute later. You okay? No. Yes, I don't know. She wrapped her arms around herself. Everyone knows now, the whole town. Good. Good? Yeah, good. Now there's no secret hanging over you, no mystery for Hale to exploit. Everyone knows what happened, and they heard it from us, not from him. Caleb moved to stand beside her. You didn't do anything wrong, Elena. Not back then, and not tonight. And I'm not going to let anyone make you feel like you did. Elena felt the tears start then, hot and messy and impossible to stop. Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much? Because you're my wife, and because... He stopped, started again. Because somewhere between you showing up covered in dust and you teaching those girls to read, I started caring about you, not just as a partner, as a person. And when you care about someone, you stand beside them when things get hard. That's just what you do. Elena turned to look at him, this quiet man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who defended her truth when he could have just as easily let her face it alone. I care about you too, she said quietly. I didn't want to, didn't think I should, but I do. Caleb reached out slowly and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Then we'll figure the rest out as we go. They stood there for a long moment, close enough to kiss, but not quite ready for that yet. Close enough to matter. And for now, that was enough. When they went back inside, the whispers started again. But this time, Elena walked through them with her hand in Caleb's, and that made all the difference. The whispers didn't stop after the social. If anything, they got louder for a few days, fed by the drama of the confrontation and the salacious details of what Elena had revealed. But something shifted too. Now, when people talked, it wasn't just speculation and rumor. It was a story with faces and names, and some people were starting to ask the questions that mattered, like why a wealthy mill owner needed to destroy a poor girl's reputation if she'd actually seduced him, like why Elena would stay and face the gossip if she was lying about what happened, like why Caleb, who everyone knew to be sensible and careful, would defend her so fiercely if he thought she was in the wrong. Elena didn't know any of this yet. She just knew that when she went to town the following week, people didn't avoid her eyes quite as deliberately. Mrs. Patterson still treated her with cool professionalism, but she didn't refuse to serve her. Martha Pierce still looked disapproving, but she kept her opinions to herself. And Kate Brennan actually waved from across the street. Small victories. Elena was learning to count them. The real change came 3 weeks later, when a woman Elena had never met showed up at the ranch on a Thursday afternoon. She was older, maybe 50, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and the weathered hands of someone who'd worked hard her whole life. "Mrs. Rourke," she called from the wagon. Elena came out of the chicken coop, brushing feathers off her apron. "Yes? I'm Dorothy Yates. My husband and I have a farm about 10 miles east of here." She climbed down from the wagon slowly, like her joints hurt. "I heard you've been teaching some of the local girls to read." Elena's stomach clenched. Here it came, the criticism, the judgment, the insistence that she wasn't qualified or appropriate or trustworthy enough to teach anyone anything. "I have," she said carefully. "I was wondering if you'd consider teaching my daughter. She's 19, should have learned years ago, but we couldn't spare her from farm work long enough to go to school, and now she's embarrassed about it." Elena blinked. "You want me to teach her? If you're willing, I can pay. Not much, but something." "I don't charge. The other girls don't pay." Dorothy looked surprised. "You should. Your time is worth something." "Teaching them is worth something to me. That's payment enough." Dorothy studied her for a long moment. "I heard what you said at the social, about what happened in Missouri." Here it was. Elena braced herself. "But I've thought about it a lot over the years, about how easy it is to believe the person with power, and how hard it is to believe the person without it." Elena didn't know what to say. "I believe you," Dorothy said quietly, "and I'd be honored if you'd teach my daughter." "Send her on Saturday afternoons," Elena managed, "same time as the others." After Dorothy left, Elena stood in the yard for a long time, watching the dust settle from her wagon wheels. She'd expected condemnation and gotten belief instead. It felt fragile, like something that might disappear if she examined it too closely. That Saturday, Dorothy's daughter Mary showed up along with Emma and Lucy. She was shy to the point of painful, could barely look Elena in the eye, but she wanted to learn with a hunger that reminded Elena of herself at that age. By the end of the lesson, Elena had 3 students who were all making progress, and something in her chest that felt dangerously close to hope. "You look happy," Caleb observed that evening over dinner. "Do I? Happier than usual. Good day?" Elena told him about Dorothy, about Mary, about the slow accumulation of small kindnesses that were starting to add up to something larger. "See," Caleb said, "I told you people would come around. Some people, not all. All is a lot to ask for. Some is pretty good." Elena pushed her food around her plate. "What about Victor Hale? He's not going to just give up." "No, probably not. But he showed his hand at the social. Everyone saw him trying to use your past against you, and everyone saw it didn't work. That takes away some of his power." "Does it? Or does it just make him angrier?" Caleb set down his fork. "Are you worried he's going to do something?" "I don't know, maybe. He seems like the type who doesn't like losing." "He is that type. But he's also careful. He won't do anything that makes him look bad in front of the town." Elena wanted to believe that. But she'd learned the hard way that men like Hale, men like Richard Carver, didn't always care about looking bad if they could get what they wanted. 2 weeks passed without incident. Elena taught her reading lessons, worked the garden, helped Caleb with the ranch, and tried to build a life that felt solid enough to trust. She even started sleeping better, the nightmares that had plagued her for months beginning to fade. Then one morning she woke to find 3 of their cattle missing. Caleb discovered it during his morning check, came back to the house with his jaw set and his eyes hard. "3 head gone," he said. "Yearlings. The good ones." "Wandered off?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer from his expression. "Fence was cut, clean cut, wire cutters. Someone took them. Hale. Can't prove it, but yeah, probably Hale." Elena felt sick. "Because of me? Because he's trying to get back at you for defending me? Because he's a bastard who takes what he wants and damn the consequences." Caleb was already putting on his coat. "I'm riding over to his place. Want to look him in the eye when I ask about my cattle." "I'm coming with you. Elena, I'm coming with you. If this is about me, I should be there." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, then just nodded. "Get dressed. We leave in 10 minutes." The ride to Hale's ranch took 45 minutes, and Elena spent the whole time rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd stand up to him, how she'd make it clear that she wasn't afraid. But when they actually arrived and saw the size of Hale's operation, the sprawling ranch house, the multiple barns, the dozen hired hands working various tasks, her confidence wavered. This was a man with resources, with power, with the ability to destroy people like her and Caleb without breaking a sweat. A hand met them in the yard, a young man with suspicious eyes. "Help you?" "We're here to see Hale," Caleb said. "He expecting you?" "No, but he'll want to talk to us anyway." The hand disappeared into the house and came back a minute later. "He'll see you in the office." Hale's office was exactly what Elena expected. Expensive furniture, a desk the size of a small wagon, shelves lined with books that looked like they'd never been opened. Hale himself sat behind the desk, looking unsurprised to see them. "Caleb, Mrs. Rourke, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "3 of my cattle went missing last night," Caleb said without preamble. "Fence was cut. That's unfortunate. Cattle thieves are a real problem in these parts. Funny thing is, it's the first time I've had trouble with thieves in 6 years." Hale spread his hands. "Times change. People get desperate or vindictive." "That's quite an accusation. You have any proof?" "Not yet." "Then I suggest you be careful about throwing around allegations. A man's reputation is valuable. You, of all people, should understand that, given your wife's history." Elena stepped forward before Caleb could respond. "My history is that I told the truth and was punished for it." "What's your history, Mr. Hale?" Hale's eyes went cold. "My history is that I built this ranch from nothing. I employ 20 men. I contribute to this community. And I don't take kindly to baseless accusations from people who barely belong here." "We belong here as much as you do." "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're a scandal that followed Caleb home, and he's too stubborn to admit it." Caleb moved then, faster than Elena had ever seen him move. He crossed the distance to Hale's desk in 3 strides and leaned in close enough that Hale actually leaned back. "You're going to stop," Caleb said, his voice deadly quiet. "You're going to stop spreading lies about my wife. You're going to stop trying to drive us out. And you're going to return my cattle. Or what? Or I stop being polite about this. Is that a threat? It's a promise. You think you're the only one with resources? The only one with friends in this county? You forget I've lived here my whole life. I know every rancher, every farmer, every shopkeeper between here and the territory line. And if I start talking about how Victor Hale steals cattle and harasses his neighbors, people are going to listen. Hale's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. You'd be lying. Would I? Because here's the thing about truth, Hale. It doesn't have to be absolute to be effective. It just has to be believable. And right now, with everyone in town watching how you're treating Elena, which story do you think they'd believe? Mine or yours? The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. Elena could see Hale calculating, weighing options, trying to figure out if Caleb was bluffing. Finally, Hale leaned back in his chair. Your cattle wandered onto my land last night. My men rounded them up this morning. They're in the south pasture. You're welcome to collect them. Wandered through a cut fence. Fences break. Could have been anything. Could have been wire cutters. I suppose we'll never know. Hale's smile was cold. But I'm a reasonable man. I'll have my men return your cattle this afternoon, and I'll have them fix that fence while they're at it. Call it neighborly cooperation. Caleb straightened up slowly. And this stops here. No more missing cattle, no more harassment, no more whispers about Elena. I don't control what people whisper about, Caleb. You know that. No, but you control what you start. And this stops. We clear? Hale looked at Elena, then back at Caleb. Crystal. On the ride back, Elena was shaking so hard she could barely hold the reins. Caleb reached over and took them from her, guiding both horses. You're okay, he said. I'm not. That was terrifying. I know, but it's done. He's not going to push anymore. How do you know? Because he realized he'd lose. Men like Hale only fight battles they can win, and we just showed him he can't win this one. Elena wanted to believe him, but the look in Hale's eyes when they left, cold and calculating and patient, suggested this wasn't over. Just paused. The cattle were returned that afternoon exactly as Hale had promised. The fence was fixed too, though whoever did it hadn't bothered to make it look like anything but a deliberate cut poorly mended. It was a message. I could have kept them. I chose not to. Remember that. That night, Elena couldn't sleep again. She lay in bed listening to the house settle and wondered how long they could keep this up. How many times they could face down Victor Hale before he found a way to win. Around midnight, she got up and went out to the main room. Caleb was sitting in the rocking chair, also awake, staring at nothing. Can't sleep either? He asked. No. Come here. She crossed to where he sat, and he pulled her down onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her. It should have felt awkward. They'd barely touched beyond holding hands, but instead it felt necessary, like the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting. I'm sorry, Elena said quietly. For what? For bringing this into your life. If you'd married someone from here, someone without a past, you wouldn't be dealing with any of this. Caleb's arms tightened around her. If I'd married someone from here, I'd be married to someone who knew me when I was 16 and stupid. Someone whose father would have opinions about how I run my ranch. Someone who'd expect me to be something I'm not. He pressed his face against her hair. I chose you, Elena, knowing you came with complications. And I'd choose you again. Even now? Even with Hale trying to destroy us? Especially now, because now I know what you're made of, and it's stronger than anything he can throw at us. Elena turned in his arms so she could see his face. When did this become an us? Probably somewhere around when you saved Kate's cow. Or maybe when you stood up to Martha in the general store. Or maybe it was the first morning when you had coffee ready before I even came downstairs. He touched her face gently. Point is, it's been us for a while now. I just didn't want to say it and scare you off. I'm not that easy to scare. No, he agreed. You're not. They sat there in the darkness, holding each other, and Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly. There was still too much unsettled for that. But certainty. The knowledge that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The next week brought an unexpected development. Ruth Callahan published a piece in the newspaper about the need for better education in Red Hollow, specifically mentioning Elena's reading lessons and the success the girls were having. It's time we recognized, Ruth wrote, That education isn't just the province of the wealthy or well-connected. Every child and every adult deserves the chance to learn, regardless of their circumstances. Mrs. Elena Rourke has taken it upon herself to provide that chance, asking nothing in return but the satisfaction of seeing her students succeed. We could all learn something from her example. Elena read the article 3 times, unable to believe it was real. This was a public endorsement, a statement that she had value here, that what she was doing mattered. "Ruth's got guts," Caleb said when she showed him. "That article is basically a challenge to anyone who still wants to gossip about you. Or it paints a target on both of us. Maybe, but it also makes it harder for Hale to come after you. How's it going to look if he attacks the woman who's teaching half the town's children to read?" Elena wanted to believe that would matter, but she'd learned that public opinion was fickle, and powerful men had ways of bending it to their will. Still, the article did seem to change things. More people nodded to her in town. Mrs. Patterson was almost cordial when Elena came to buy supplies, and 2 more families asked if their daughters could join the Saturday lessons. By early October, Elena had 7 students. The kitchen table wasn't big enough anymore, so she started holding lessons on the porch when the weather was good, or in the barn when it wasn't. The girls ranged in age from 10 to 22, and they all came with different levels of skill and different reasons for wanting to learn. Emma wanted to read novels. Lucy wanted to write letters to a cousin in Denver. Mary wanted to keep her own accounts, so she'd know if merchants were cheating her. And the younger girls just wanted to prove they could do something hard. Elena loved it. Loved the concentration on their faces when they were sounding out words. Loved the triumph when they finished a difficult passage. Loved the way they helped each other without being asked. This was purpose. This was belonging. This was the thing she'd been looking for without knowing it. "You should charge them," Caleb said one evening after the girls had left. "No. Elena, you're spending 6 hours every Saturday teaching. That's worth something. It's worth what it gives me. That's enough." "What does it give you?" She thought about it. "Proof that I'm not what Richard Carver said I was. Proof that I can build something instead of just running from what other people destroyed." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You know you don't have to prove anything, right? Not to me, not to this town, not to anyone." "I know, but I have to prove it to myself." He nodded like he understood. And maybe he did. The first frost came in late October, turning the grass silver in the mornings and reminding everyone that winter was coming. Elena spent a week helping Caleb prepare the ranch, checking fences, moving cattle to the winter pasture, making sure the barn was tight against the cold. It was hard work, but she'd gotten stronger over the months. Could lift hay bales without her arms shaking, could ride for hours without getting sore, could work from dawn to dusk and still have energy left for the evening. She was different than she'd been when she arrived. Physically, yes, but also in ways that were harder to measure. She didn't flinch when people looked at her anymore, didn't automatically assume their attention meant judgment. She'd learned to separate curiosity from hostility and to meet both with her head up. "You've changed," Sarah Miller said one afternoon when Elena stopped by the mill to buy flour. "Have I? You're more comfortable in your own skin. When you first got here, you looked like you were waiting for someone to hit you. Now you just look like you belong." "I'm still waiting sometimes," Elena admitted. "We all are. That's just being human." Sarah measured out the flour carefully. "But you've stopped apologizing for existing. That's the difference." Elena carried that observation home with her, turning it over in her mind. Had she stopped apologizing, or had she just gotten better at hiding the apology? Either way, she was still here, still teaching, still building, and that had to count for something. The confrontation with Victor Hale came to a head in early November, though not in the way Elena expected. She was in town buying supplies when she saw him outside the bank, talking to a man she didn't recognize. The stranger was well-dressed in city clothes, and they were examining some kind of document together. Elena kept her distance, but she couldn't help noticing how animated Hale looked, excited about something. That evening, Tom Brennan stopped by the ranch looking worried. "You hear about Hale's plans?" he asked Caleb. "What plans?" "He's trying to buy up the water rights for this whole section, talking to some investors from back east about expanding his operation. If he pulls it off, he'll control access to the creek that runs through your land and mine and half a dozen other small ranches." Caleb's expression went hard. "He can't do that. Those are shared water rights." He can if he gets the territory to reclassify them. And with enough money, he probably can. After Tom left, Caleb stood at the window, staring out at the land that was supposed to be his hands clenched into fists. "What do we do?" Elena asked. "Fight it. Get the other ranchers together. Make enough noise that the territory can't ignore us." "And if that doesn't work?" He turned to look at her. "Then we figure out plan B. But I'm not giving up this ranch without a fight. I built this place. It's mine, and I'll be damned if Victor Hale takes it from me because he's got deeper pockets." The meeting happened 3 days later in the church hall. Every small rancher and farmer within 20 miles crowded into the space. Caleb stood at the front and laid out what Hale was trying to do, and Elena watched faces go from concerned to angry to determined. "We need to submit a formal protest," Caleb said. "Show the territory that we're unified, that we're not going to roll over." "And if they approve it anyway," someone called from the back, "then we lawyer up, pool our resources, fight it in court if we have to." "That could take years." "So we take years. What else are we going to do? Give up?" The room erupted in argument, everyone talking at once. Elena sat in the back and watched, feeling useless. This was a fight about land and water and rights she barely understood. What could she possibly contribute? But then she heard Martha Pierce's voice cutting through the noise. "This is what happens when you let outsiders in. They bring their problems with them." Everyone went quiet. "What are you talking about, Martha?" Ruth Callahan demanded. "Hale didn't start this until after Caleb brought that woman here. It's obvious he's trying to drive them out, and the rest of us are going to suffer for it." Elena felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Her instinct was to shrink, to apologize, to offer to leave so everyone else could be safe. But then she thought about Dorothy Yates, who'd trusted her to teach her daughter. About Emma and Lucy and Mary and all the other girls who came to her porch every Saturday. About Sarah Miller and Kate Brennan and even Mrs. Patterson, who'd slowly started to thaw. She stood up. "You're right," she said, and her voice was steady. "Victor Hale is trying to drive me out. He's using the land rights as a weapon because he knows if he can force Caleb to leave, I'll have to leave too. But here's the thing, Martha. He was trying to buy up land rights before I ever got here. Tom, didn't you say he's been pressuring you for 3 years? Tom Brennan nodded. "That's right. Been trying to buy my place since I inherited it from my father." "And Sarah, didn't he try to force your husband to sell the mill last year?" "He did," Sarah confirmed. Elena turned to face Martha directly. "So this isn't about me. This is about a man who wants control and doesn't care who he has to crush to get it. And if you give him what he wants now, if you blame me and force me out, you'll just be proving that his tactics work. And then he'll use them on the next person and the next, until everyone who doesn't have his kind of money is gone." The room was silent. "I didn't come here to cause problems," Elena continued. "I came here to start over, to build a life, to maybe become someone worth knowing. And I'm not perfect. None of us are. But I'm not the enemy here. Victor Hale is. And if we're going to fight him, we need to fight him together." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Kate Brennan stood up. "Elena's right. Hale's been a problem for years. Blaming her is just making it easier for him." Dorothy Yates stood next. "I've watched this woman teach my daughter to read with more patience than I've got in my whole body. She's not the problem." One by one, others stood. Not everyone. Martha Pierce remained firmly seated, along with a few others who clearly still had doubts. But enough. Enough that when the vote came to submit a unified protest, it passed by a clear majority. After the meeting, Caleb found Elena outside where she'd gone to catch her breath. "That was brave," he said. "That was terrifying." "Same thing." He pulled her into his arms right there in front of everyone who was filing out of the hall. "I'm proud of you." "For what? Standing up and making a speech?" "For staying, for fighting, for choosing to belong here instead of just accepting that you don't." Elena pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the smell of him, soap and leather, and the particular dust of the ranch. "I'm tired of running, Caleb. I'm tired of letting people like Hale and Carver decide where I'm allowed to exist. Then we don't let them. We stand our ground. Even if it's hard. Especially if it's hard." They stood there holding each other while the rest of Red Hollow walked past, and Elena realized she didn't care who saw, didn't care what anyone thought. This was her life now, her choice, her home, and she'd fight for it. The protest took 3 weeks to compile. every rancher and farmer adding their signature to a document that ran 6 pages long. Caleb spent his evenings at the kitchen table, going over the language with Tom Brennan and Sarah's husband, making sure every argument was airtight. Elena would bring them coffee and listen to them debate water law and territorial regulations, absorbing a crash course in how communities fought back against men with money. "The key is showing economic impact," Tom explained one night. "If we can prove that Hale's monopoly would destroy the local economy, the territory has to listen." "Does it, though?" Caleb asked. "Or does it just have to pretend to listen while doing whatever the money tells it to do?" "You're cynical tonight." "I'm realistic. I've seen how this works." Elena set down fresh coffee and sat beside Caleb. "Then we make it impossible for them to ignore us. We get people to care who aren't directly affected. Make it bigger than just water rights." Both men looked at her. "How?" Tom asked. "Ruth's newspaper. She could write about it. Frame it as the small farmers versus the monopoly. People love that story." "People love it when it's happening somewhere else," Caleb said. "When it's their neighbor, they're less enthusiastic." "Maybe, but Ruth has subscribers all over the territory. If she runs the story, other papers might pick it up. And if Hale's trying to influence territorial decisions, having everyone watching makes it harder for him to buy the outcome he wants." Tom was nodding slowly. "It's not a bad idea. Worth a shot anyway." Ruth ran the story the following week, front page, with a headline that read, "Local ranchers fight for survival against land grab." She didn't mention Hale by name, didn't have to. Everyone knew who she was talking about. The response was immediate. 2 other papers picked up the story. Letters started arriving at the territorial office. And suddenly, what had been a quiet attempt at consolidation became public enough that ignoring it would be noticed. Hale, predictably, was furious. Elena heard about it from Sarah, who heard it from her husband, who'd been in the bank when Hale came in ranting about slander and interference and ungrateful neighbors who didn't understand progress. "He's losing control of the narrative," Sarah said, satisfaction clear in her voice. "And he doesn't know how to fight a story, only knows how to fight people." "Will he come after Ruth?" "Probably, but Ruth's tough, and she's got the law on her side. Everything she printed was factual." Still, Elena worried. She'd seen what happened when powerful men felt cornered. They lashed out. They found the weakest link and pulled until something broke. She just hoped that link wouldn't be her. The territorial hearing was scheduled for the first week of December. Caleb and 5 other ranchers would make the trip to the territorial capital to present their case. Elena wanted to go, but someone needed to stay and manage the ranch, and she was the obvious choice. "I don't like leaving you here alone," Caleb said the night before he was supposed to leave. "I'll be fine. I've handled the ranch before." "Not with Hale looking for ways to hurt us." "What's he going to do? Come over and steal more cattle? I can handle that." Caleb didn't look convinced, but he also didn't have much choice. The hearing was too important to miss. The morning he left, Elena walked him out to the wagon. The pre-dawn air was cold enough to see their breath, and frost covered everything in a thin silver coating. "Don't take any chances," Caleb said, kissing her forehead. "If anything feels wrong, ride to the Brennans. Don't try to handle it yourself." "I'll be fine. You just focus on the hearing." "I'll be back in 4 days, 5 at most." "I'll be here." She watched him drive away until the wagon disappeared into the gray morning, then turned back to the empty ranch and told herself she wasn't nervous. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. Elena managed the chores, taught her Saturday lessons, and tried not to jump at every unexpected sound. Emma had started reading full books now, and watching her work through Jane Eyre with fierce concentration made Elena forget about Hale and hearings and everything else. "This Jane is stubborn," Emma observed during their lesson. "She is. I like her." "Me too." "Why do you think she stays? At Thornfield? When she could leave?" Elena thought about it. "Because running away doesn't actually solve anything. It just moves your problems to a new location. Sometimes you have to stand still long enough to deal with what's in front of you." Emma looked at her thoughtfully. "Is that why you stayed in Red Hollow?" "Partly. Mostly because I got tired of running. And because for the first time in a long time, I found people who made staying feel worth it." The 3rd day, Victor Hale showed up. Elena was in the barn checking on the horses when she heard the wagon. She came out to find Hale climbing down, alone, looking around the property with proprietary interest. "Mr. Hale," she said, keeping her voice level. "Caleb's not here." "I know. He's at the territorial capital, arguing against progress. Hale smiled, but it was all edges. I came to talk to you. We don't have anything to talk about. I think we do. See, I've been thinking about our situation, about how we got here. Elena stayed by the barn door, calculating distances. The house was 50 feet away. The rifle was inside in the corner by the fireplace. Too far to be useful if Hale decided to be more than talk. And I've realized something, Hale continued, walking closer. This whole mess started because I underestimated you. Thought you were just some desperate woman looking for a meal ticket. Didn't realize you'd turn out to be so much trouble. I'm not trying to be trouble. I'm just trying to live my life. And that's the problem, isn't it? You living your life interferes with me living mine, with me building something bigger than one woman's precious feelings. Water rights aren't about my feelings. They're about survival for everyone who isn't you. Hale stopped about 10 feet away. You're smart. Smarter than Caleb gives you credit for, I think. That article in the paper, that was your idea, wasn't it? Elena didn't answer. Thought so. You understand leverage. Understand how to manipulate public opinion. He cocked his head. You could have been useful if you'd chosen the right side. I chose the side I'm on. Then let me make you an offer. One time right now before things get worse. He pulled an envelope from his coat. There's $500 in here, enough to get you anywhere you want to go. Set yourself up comfortable. All you have to do is leave. Tell Caleb it's not working. Tell him you can't handle ranch life. Tell him whatever you want. Just go. Elena stared at him. You're offering me money to abandon my husband. I'm offering you a way out before this turns ugly. Because it will turn ugly, Mrs. Rourke. I'm going to win that hearing. I have too much invested, too many connections. And when I do, Caleb's going to lose access to water. He'll have to sell his ranch for pennies on the dollar, and you'll end up right back where you started, alone and desperate. Or we'll fight you in court. With what money? Legal battles take years and cost thousands. Caleb doesn't have that kind of capital. Hale held out the envelope. Take this. Start over somewhere new. No shame in knowing when you're beaten. For a moment, Elena almost laughed, because here was Victor Hale, powerful and wealthy and connected, offering her $500 to run away. And 3 months ago, she would have taken it, would have seen it as proof that she didn't belong, that running was the only option she'd ever have. But 3 months ago, she hadn't taught 7 girls to read, hadn't stood up in a general store and claimed her truth, hadn't found a man who believed her worth defending, hadn't learned the difference between running away and moving forward. No, she said. Hale's expression hardened. Excuse me? I said no. Keep your money. I'm not leaving. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make, and I'm tired of letting men like you decide what I'm allowed to choose. Men like me? Men who think money and power mean you get to control everything, that you can just buy people's lives because you want their land or their silence or whatever else you've decided you deserve. Elena took a step toward him and had the satisfaction of seeing him take a step back. I already had one man try to destroy me because I wouldn't give him what he wanted. I survived that. I'll survive you too. Hale's face went cold with rage. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A bully who's never been told no before. Well, I'm telling you no. And I'm going to keep telling you no until you get tired of hearing it. You think your little protest is going to change anything? You think because some farmers signed a piece of paper, the territory is going to side with you over me? I think the territory is going to have a harder time ignoring us than you planned. And I think you're scared that for once, money won't be enough. Hale stepped closer, and Elena's hand moved instinctively to the pocket of her apron where she'd been carrying a small knife for cutting twine. She didn't pull it out, but the movement was enough. Hale noticed. Are you threatening me, Mrs. Rourke? I'm standing my ground. If that feels like a threat, maybe you should examine why you're used to people backing down. For a long moment, they stood there in the cold morning, two people who'd been pushed to their limits by different paths, neither willing to bend. Finally, Hale stepped back and tucked the envelope back in his coat. You're going to regret this, he said. Probably. But at least I'll regret something I chose instead of something someone forced on me. After he left, Elena's hand started shaking so badly she had to sit down on the porch steps. She'd just made an enemy of the most powerful man in the county, had turned down $500 that could have made her life easier, had chosen uncertainty and struggle over safety and escape, but she'd also chosen herself, chosen the life she was building here, chosen to believe that belonging was worth fighting for. When Caleb came home 2 days later, exhausted and travel-worn, the first thing he did was pull her into his arms and just hold her. "How did it go?" Elena asked against his chest. "We won't know for a few weeks. They're reviewing everything, taking comments, doing whatever bureaucrats do." He pulled back to look at her. "But I think we made a strong case. Tom was brilliant, and the fact that 3 other papers ran stories about it meant they couldn't just dismiss us." "That's good. What about here? Any problems?" Elena considered not telling him about Hale's visit, then decided she was done with secrets. She told him everything, the offer, the threats, her refusal. Caleb's jaw got tighter and tighter as she talked, and by the end his hands were fists again. "He came here while I was gone, alone. Cornered you in the barn." "I wasn't cornered. I was fine. You could have been hurt. But I wasn't. I handled it." "You shouldn't have had to handle it." Caleb started pacing, agitated in a way she'd never seen him. "I should have been here. Should have—" "What? Been here every second for the rest of our lives in case Victor Hale shows up? That's not realistic, Caleb. And I'm not some fragile thing that needs constant protection. I faced him down. I sent him away. And I'm still here." Caleb stopped pacing and looked at her. "You really told him no to $500? "I really told him no." "Why?" "Because leaving would mean he won. Would mean every Victor Hale and Richard Carver in the world gets to decide where I'm allowed to exist. And I'm done with that." She crossed to where he stood. "I chose you, Caleb. I chose this ranch, this town, this life. And I'm not giving that up because some bully with deep pockets thinks he can buy me out." Caleb cupped her face in his hands. "I love you." The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and enormous. "You don't have to say that," Elena whispered. "I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true. I love you. Loved you for weeks now, probably. Just didn't know how to say it without making it weird." Elena felt tears threatening. "This is definitely weird. Yeah, well, we're weird people. Seems fitting." She laughed, and it came out half-sob. "I love you too, even though you're terrible at romantic declarations. I'll work on it." "Don't. I like you exactly how you are." He kissed her then, there in the middle of the kitchen that had become theirs, and Elena felt something click into place. Not perfection, nothing about their lives was perfect, but completion. The sense that all the broken pieces of herself had finally found a place where they fit. The territorial decision came in mid-December, delivered by official letter to every rancher who'd signed the protest. Caleb opened it with shaking hands while Elena stood beside him, both of them bracing for the worst. "Water rights petition denied," Caleb read aloud. "Existing shared access agreements to remain in effect. Any future petitions for modification must demonstrate clear public benefit and undergo full community review process." He looked up, stunned. "We won." "Read it again. Make sure it says what you think it says." He read it again, and Elena read it over his shoulder, and it still said the same thing. They'd won. Hale's attempt to monopolize the water rights had been rejected. The celebration that night brought half the ranchers in the county to the ranch. Someone brought whiskey, someone else brought a fiddle, and before long the house was full of people laughing and talking and dancing badly in the cramped space. Kate Brennan pulled Elena into a hug. "You did it. You actually did it. We all did it. Everyone who signed the protest. But you're the one who thought to make it public. If you hadn't suggested Ruth's article, who knows what would have happened?" Sarah Miller appeared with 2 glasses of whiskey. "To Elena Rourke, who came here a stranger and became the person we needed." They drank, and the whiskey burned going down. And Elena thought about how strange it was that belonging could happen like this. Not gradually, not earned through years of proving yourself, but all at once in moments that mattered. In choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. In standing up when sitting down would be safer. In believing that your voice deserved to be heard, even when powerful people wanted you silent. Around midnight, when most people had left and only the closest neighbors remained, Victor Hale's name came up. "What do you think he'll do now?" Tom Brennan asked. "Lick his wounds," Caleb said. "Look for another angle. Men like Hale don't give up just because they lost one battle." "Should we be worried?" Probably, but we'll deal with whatever comes. Same way we dealt with this. Ruth Callahan, who'd been quietly drinking in the corner, spoke up. He's already looking for another angle. Asked me to run a retraction of my article. Said if I didn't, he'd pull his advertising. What did you tell him? That I don't take editorial direction from people I'm writing about. He wasn't pleased. She grinned. But my subscription rates have gone up 30% since I started covering this story. Turns out people like reading about powerful men getting knocked down a peg. After everyone left, Elena and Caleb cleaned up in comfortable silence. The house was a mess. Muddy footprints on the floor, empty glasses everywhere, food spilled on the table. But it was the mess of celebration, of community, of people who cared enough to show up. Thank you, Caleb said as they worked. For what? For not taking Hale's money, for staying, for making this feel like something worth fighting for. Elena set down the dish she'd been washing. I think I needed to stay more than you needed me to. Does that make sense? Yeah, it does. I spent so long running that I forgot what it felt like to have a reason to stay, to be part of something bigger than just surviving. And now? Now I know what home feels like. And it's not a place. It's not even really the people, though they help. It's the choice to stop running, to say this is where I stand and I'm not moving unless I decide to move. Caleb pulled her close, and they stood there in the messy kitchen, holding each other while the fire in the hearth burned down to embers. The weeks after the victory were strange. Life returned to normal, chores and lessons, and the steady rhythm of ranch work. But something had shifted. Elena found herself welcomed in places that had been cool before. Mrs. Patterson actually smiled at her in the general store. Martha Pierce still looked disapproving, but she'd stopped making comments. And Victor Hale, when Elena saw him in town, looked right through her like she didn't exist, which suited her fine. The reading lessons expanded again. By January, Elena had 12 students, ranging from a 6-year-old girl who'd just learned her letters to a 40-year-old man who'd been too embarrassed to admit he couldn't read until his wife forced him to ask for help. Elena moved the lessons to the church hall, where there was more room, and started holding them twice a week. You're going to need to make this official at some point, Ruth told her one afternoon. Start calling yourself a teacher instead of just someone who helps people read. I'm not qualified to be a teacher. You're teaching people. That makes you a teacher. Everything else is just paperwork. Elena thought about that, about how she'd spent so long believing that her worth was defined by what other people said about her, by credentials and permissions and official approval. But the girls reading books they'd never been able to access before didn't care about her qualifications. They just cared that she was patient and persistent and believed they could learn. Maybe that was enough. In February, on a day when the snow was falling thick enough to muffle sound, Elena was teaching a lesson when the door opened and a stranger walked in. He was older, well-dressed, with the kind of face that had seen too much sun and not enough joy. Can I help you? Elena asked. The man looked around the room, taking in the dozen students, the makeshift classroom, Elena standing at the front with a primer in her hands. I'm looking for Elena Ward, he said. Elena's blood went cold. No one had called her that in months. Here she was, Elena Rourke, Caleb's wife, the woman who taught reading and helped sick cows and stood up to powerful men. I'm Elena Rourke, she said carefully. You were Elena Ward, in Millbrook, Missouri. The room went silent. Every student was watching, waiting to see what would happen. I was, Elena admitted. Who are you? Robert Carver, Richard Carver's brother. Elena felt the world tilt. What do you want? To talk to you, alone if possible. Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of these people. Robert Carver looked uncomfortable. It's about my brother. About what happened in Millbrook. What about it? I need to know if what you said was true. If he did what you claimed. Elena's hands were shaking. She set down the primer carefully. Are you asking if your brother tried to assault me? Yes, he did. Are you asking if I seduced him like he claimed? No, I didn't. Are you asking if I've been lying for the past 3 years? No, I haven't. Is there anything else you need to know? Robert Carver's face had gone gray. I was afraid you'd say that? Why are you here? Because 2 months ago, another woman came forward. A girl who worked in the mill after you left. She said Richard did the same thing to her, and when she fought him off, he told the same story he told about you. Elena couldn't breathe. Is she okay? She's alive, but her reputation is destroyed, same as yours was. And when I heard her story, I started thinking about what you'd said, about how everyone believed Richard because he was wealthy and respected, and how convenient it was that he had the same excuse twice. So you came here to what? Apologize? To ask if you'd be willing to make a statement, formal, legal, to support this girl's claim. The sheriff in Millbrook won't pursue charges based on her word alone. But if there's a pattern, if there's evidence that Richard has done this before, you want me to go back, Elena said flatly. I want justice for both of you, for however many other women Richard has hurt and will hurt if someone doesn't stop him. Elena looked at her students, at these people who'd trusted her enough to learn from her despite everything. Looked at Emma, who'd been the first to ask for help. At Mary, who'd been too ashamed to admit she couldn't read. At all of them who'd chosen to show up and be vulnerable and believe they deserved better. I need to think about it, she said. After the lesson ended, after the students filed out with worried glances back at her, Elena sat alone in the empty church hall and tried to figure out what she felt. Vindication that someone finally believed her? Rage that it took another victim for anyone to listen? Fear at the thought of facing Millbrook again? Guilt that she'd escaped and left other women vulnerable? All of it. None of it. Something too complicated to name. Caleb found her there an hour later, sitting in the cold building with no fire lit. Tom Brennan said a stranger was asking for you, he said. Said you looked shaken. Elena told him everything. About Robert Carver, about the new victim, about the request to go back and testify. What do you want to do? Caleb asked when she finished. I don't know. Part of me wants to go back and make sure Richard Carver pays for what he's done. Part of me never wants to see that town again as long as I live. Both of those are reasonable, but which one is right? Caleb sat beside her on the cold bench. I can't answer that. Only you can. But I can tell you that whatever you decide, I'll support it. If you want to go back and testify, I'll go with you. If you want to stay here and never think about Millbrook again, that's fine too. There's no right answer, Elena, just what you can live with. Elena leaned against him, grateful for the solid warmth of his presence. I keep thinking about that girl, about how scared she must be, how alone. You can't save everyone. I know, but I could save her, or at least try. Then that's your answer. Elena rode back to Millbrook in March, with Caleb beside her and Robert Carver leading the way. The journey took 5 days, and every mile closer Elena felt the old fear trying to creep back in. The certainty that she'd be judged, dismissed, destroyed all over again. But she wasn't that person anymore. Wasn't the scared girl who'd run because she didn't know how else to survive? She was Elena Rourke now, who'd faced down Victor Hale and Martha Pierce and her own doubts, who'd built something worth keeping, who'd learned that truth didn't need to be perfect to matter. The girl's name was Sarah, not Sarah Miller, a different Sarah, younger and more fragile. She was 17 and terrified, and when Elena met her in the sheriff's office, she saw her own younger self reflected back. You believe me? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. I believe you. Because the same thing happened to me, and I'm here to make sure this time someone listens. The testimony took 3 days. Elena told her story again, every detail she'd tried to forget, with Caleb sitting in the back of the room as a silent anchor. Sarah told her story too, crying through parts of it, but getting it all out. And Robert Carver, to his credit, stood beside them and corroborated what he could. Richard Carver didn't show up to defend himself. Sent a lawyer instead, a slick man from the city who tried to paint both women as liars looking for attention. Tried to suggest that they'd coordinated their stories, that Elena was bitter about being rejected and had coached Sarah to echo her lies. But the sheriff, a different sheriff than the one who'd dismissed Elena 3 years ago, listened to everything and made his own judgment. Mr. Carver, he said when the testimony concluded, you're under arrest for assault. We'll be investigating any other complaints that might come forward. Elena watched Richard Carver get led away in handcuffs, this man who'd haunted her for years, and felt nothing. Not triumph, not vindication, just tired relief that it was done. Afterward, young Sarah found her outside the sheriff's office. Thank you, she said, for coming back, for not leaving me to face this alone. I know what alone feels like, Elena said. No one should have to carry something like this by themselves. What happens now? For you, I mean. I go home, back to my husband and my students and the life I've built. What about you? Sarah looked uncertain. I don't know. This town won't forgive me for pressing charges. Not against someone like Richard Carver. Elena thought about Red Hollow, about the community she'd found there, about how Sarah Miller and Kate Brennan and even Mrs. Patterson had made room for her despite her past. If you need somewhere to start over, Elena said carefully, there's a town called Red Hollow, about 300 miles west. It's not perfect, and the people aren't all friendly, but they gave me a chance when no one else would. And if you went there, if you said, I sent you, I think they'd give you a chance too. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. You'd do that for me? After just meeting me? Someone did it for me once. Seems only fair to pass it along. The trip home felt different than the trip there. Lighter somehow, even though Elena was exhausted and emotionally wrung out. She'd faced the thing she'd been running from and survived it. Had stood in the place that had broken her and refused to break again. You're quiet, Caleb observed as they rode. I'm thinking. About how running away and moving forward aren't the same thing. I thought getting on that stagecoach to Red Hollow was running away from Millbrook. But it wasn't. It was moving forward to something better. And coming back here, testifying, that wasn't going backward. It was finishing something I'd started when I fought back against Carver the first time. Caleb reached over and took her hand. You're not the same person who left Missouri. No, I'm not. But I think I needed to come back to prove that to myself. To see that I'd actually changed, not just changed locations. When they arrived back in Red Hollow a week later, dirty and tired and ready to be home, there was a crowd waiting. Not hostile, welcoming. Ruth and Sarah Miller and Kate Brennan and Dorothy Yates and half the town, all there because word had spread about where Elena had gone and why. We heard what you did, Ruth said, pulling Elena into a fierce hug. Heard you went back to testify. That took guts. I just did what needed doing. That's what guts looks like. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Elena and Caleb sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. The air was cold but clear, and Elena pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I've been thinking about something, she said. What's that? About making the reading lessons official. Maybe opening an actual school. Nothing fancy, just a place where people who never got the chance can come and learn. You want to be a teacher? I want to do what I've been doing, just more formally. Ruth was right. I'm already teaching. Might as well own it. Caleb smiled. You'd be good at it. You already are good at it. I don't have credentials, don't have formal training. You have something better. You have empathy for people who think they're too old or too stupid to learn. You have patience. And you have proof that it works. 12 students who couldn't read 6 months ago and can now. Elena leaned against him, watching the sky darken from purple to black. When I got on that stagecoach, I thought I was giving up. Thought I was accepting that I'd never be more than what Richard Carver said I was. And now I know that what people say about you doesn't define you. What you do defines you. How you treat people, how you show up when things are hard, how you choose to use whatever power you have, that's what matters. That's a good philosophy. It's the only one that makes sense, because if we let other people's opinions determine our worth, we'll never be worth anything. There'll always be someone ready to tear us down. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars multiply across the sky. Then Caleb spoke again. I'm proud of you, for going back, for testifying, for not letting Carver win even after all this time. He didn't win. That's the thing I finally understand. He hurt me, but he didn't win. Because I'm here, living a life I chose, with people I care about, doing work that matters. And he's going to jail, so who really won? You did. We did. You and me and everyone in this town who decided I was worth giving a chance. The harvest gathering in October came around again, a full year since Elena had first stood in the church hall and faced down Victor Hale. This time, she walked in with Caleb's hand in hers, with 12 students who could read now, with the knowledge that she belonged here not because everyone liked her, but because she'd earned her place. Hale was there, standing by the refreshment table like always, watching her with cold eyes. But when their gazes met across the room, Elena didn't look away, didn't flinch, just met his stare with calm certainty until he was the one who turned away. That felt good, she admitted to Caleb. What did? Not being afraid of him anymore? You were never really afraid of him. You were afraid of being driven out again. But you know now that's not going to happen. How do you know? Because you're not the only one who'd fight to keep you here. You've got a whole town now. And it was true. Throughout the evening, people came up to say hello, to ask about the reading lessons, to tell her about their children or their farms, or just to pass the time. Not everyone. Martha Pierce still kept her distance, and a few others remained coolly polite. But enough. More than enough. Late in the evening, as the lanterns burned low and people started heading home, Victor Hale walked past Elena on his way to the door. He paused, and for a moment she thought he might say something, might make one last attempt to assert dominance or spread poison. Instead, he just nodded. A brief, sharp movement that might have been respect or might have been acknowledgement of defeat. Either way, Elena took it. On the ride home, with Caleb drowsing beside her and the stars brilliant overhead, Elena thought about the woman who'd stumbled off a stagecoach covered in dust and tears. That woman had been so certain she had to be small to survive, had to hide and apologize and make herself forgettable. She'd been wrong. Surviving wasn't about being small. It was about being honest, about standing up even when your legs were shaking, about choosing to stay when running would be easier, about believing that your truth mattered even when powerful people wanted you silent. And thriving, really thriving, was about building something bigger than yourself, about teaching girls to read, about helping sick cows, about standing beside your neighbors when they needed you and letting them stand beside you when you needed them. Elena Rourke had learned that belonging wasn't given. It was built, piece by piece, choice by choice, day by day. Built from small acts of courage and quiet persistence and the simple decision to keep showing up even when showing up was hard. She'd arrived in Red Hollow running from her past. But somewhere along the way, she'd stopped running and started building. Started creating a future that wasn't about escape, but about presence. About being fully, honestly, messily herself in a place that had learned to make room for her. Not because she was perfect, not because she'd proven herself worthy, but because she'd chosen to belong, and that choice, stubborn and repeated and reinforced by action, had turned into something real. The ranch appeared on the horizon, dark except for the single lamp they always left burning in the window. Home. Not the place she'd been born, not the place she'd fled, but the place she'd chosen. The place she'd fought for. The place that had fought for her, too. Caleb stirred as they pulled into the yard. "We're here." "Yeah," Elena said, climbing down from the wagon. "We're home." And for the first time in her life, that word meant exactly what it should. Not just a location, but a belonging. Not just a house, but a place she'd earned the right to stay. She'd started over in dust and silence, arrived broken and afraid and certain she'd never be whole again. But she'd been wrong about that too. Wholeness wasn't about being undamaged. It was about gathering up your broken pieces and building something new with them, something stronger than what had been broken in the first place. Elena Rourke had done that, had taken the shattered remains of who she'd been and built someone worth knowing. Someone who taught and learned and stood her ground and loved fiercely and refused to be smaller than she was just because small felt safer. And if that wasn't worth the hard journey to get here, she didn't know what was.